All right, welcome to Kadosh Life. Super excited today to have Brandon Kroll joining us. This is going to be my first interview with a guest on my own show. I've been a guest on many other shows, so I'm super excited to be chatting with Brandon today. Kadosh Life, just to share with everyone, I called my channel Kadosh Life because Kadosh is the word in Hebrew for set apart, being set apart, living a life set apart. And so this channel, where we talk about how to live a set apart life from beast systems and how to just exposing truth and exposing the hidden truths of the world and sharing real life stories and biblical truths and anything else in between that's applicable to mind, body, spirit, wellness. So thanks for joining us today, Brandon. Super excited to have you.
I'm honored to be your first guest.
Yeah, it's awesome. You had some information and knowledge that I was aware of as well, but I hadn't heard anybody really put it all together the way that you had. And so today we're going to be talking about the Nimrod cult. I don't know if that's exactly how you refer to it, but
fair enough.
A sect of the Brotherhood that's kind of unique and specific, and really goes all the way back through biblical history. So before we get too far into talking about Nimrod and the cult and how it shows up today in society, can you just share a little bit with us about yourself? I found you on Instagram through your Instagram account that you do a lot of exposing on. I don't know if you have any other platforms or anywhere else you speak. I know you've done some other shows, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about that, and also about, your background and how you got into studying all of this and where your interest came from and getting into, the occult history and all of that kind of stuff. And also a little bit about your background with Christianity and upbringing and that.
I'll start at chapter 1. So I was born in Massachusetts, Greenfield. The hospital doesn't exist anymore. And the circumstances surrounding that is that my parents were part of a home invasion, and they shot the guy in the back of the head. I mean, coming into the world just with that as your first chapter, you're just like, whoa.
Your parents shot him in the back of the head?
Yeah, they basically my birth father, and you can look this up on mass.gov. He was doing some odd job for the gentleman, and it was raining the day before. They broke into his house and started using his downstairs basement to dry their clothes, and they started, grabbing food. They started grabbing, things of value. And he came home early for lunch unexpectedly, and instead of just tying him up and running out of there, he took the gun that was on top of the cabinet and shot him in the back of the head. Yeah.
Wow.
So, my birth mom, she had a horrible upbringing. She was molested by somebody when she was about 5-6 years old in a closet. Her mom didn't even want her. She was telling the doctor, I want you to seal up my tubes. I don't want to have the kid. And being a diehard Catholic, he's like, I'm not allowing that. That's God's gift to you. And so she was already in a world where people didn't want her. So she's looking for anybody just to accept her. So she kept having a little bit of a consistent thing of falling for the bad guy. And then she was molested by the pastor's son at the church in the town. So again, this is already building up of I just want someone to love me, And when she met Barry, my dad, he was just seemed so charming. He was tough. He was like, oh yeah, I'll take care. And then totally did a reversal and was starting to use me as leverage of saying, listen, if you don't do it, I'll kill the kid, or when he's born, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of it, she was only going along with it out of self-preservation. So yeah, I was put up then for adoption. I was adopted into a family that was Christian, and they lived in Connecticut. There were 5 other adoptees, 4 biological kids. So a real big fam of 10 total. And there were issues that went on in that house too. My dad is one of those individuals where a lot of the stuff he promotes is Christian, yet his own personality is very domineering. He comes from a background of son of a fighter pilot in Nazi Germany. and then he came over after the war and stuff like that. So he's already has this really need of control. And that need of control was honestly like the biggest thing as a kid, because as an adoptee, you always kind of want to just like, how do you phrase it? Like you always want to impress somebody. You want to be accepted, because you're not part of the real family. So there's always that little disconnect of like, how can you be a people pleaser and make them love you and stuff like that. So by the time I reached teen years, there were issues going on where my mother was becoming heavily alcoholic, and she's already dabbled here and there through the past years. But around the teen years, it was very suspicious because my sister would be spending a lot of time in back rooms and whatnot, allegedly for infections and stuff like that he was checking. But it's like, she has her own insurance with adopting, like Husky Insurance covers that stuff. You're not a doctor. And they'd be downstairs in the basement because we were doing homeschooling. They'd be down in the basements, and you tie her up with the weightlifting room with the karate belts and whatnot. It's just like, as I think back, yes. Okay. And then again, for the longest time between like 13 to 7, I didn't connect the dots. I just was knowing that there were some really weird things going on. Like my mom never really drank before this, and then we were going to move back out to Arizona because we've traveled a lot with moves. And the only kid he took with him was Amanda. I mean, of course, we all thought it was the favored kid, and that's kind of always the mentality, is like, if you want to get in good with dad, you have to squeal on the kid below you. It was really messed up. I've never been really much of that. And out of all the kids, I'm probably the one that's always stood up to him, just like, that's not right. Or I'd ask a question, and he'd be like, well, anyways, I have to question everything I do. So he took Amanda. This led to my mom, again, becoming incredibly stupefied every night, like trying to just ease her pain and whatnot. And my younger sister went up to Vermont because schooling was not going anywhere. I only made it up to like 6th grade, a 10th into 7th with our homeschooling, and that was it. Did GED and then went to college. And I wasn't doing so well there because it was a very dogmatic, it has to be by our denomination theology. And I've always been one of those people, again, I think outside the box. I can't just be put on the blinders. This is all you know. This is all that's supposed to be. And I've always had a thing for writing when I was like 11. And with the trauma that was going on at home, there wasn't really someone to talk to. So I've always been big into reading and escaping. Like my mom would be in the other room, and I would just be like, all right, I don't have a book. I'm going to read a dictionary. I mean, that's how much I just loved words. And wasn't doing so well down there in Florida. So I got kind of kicked out because of grades. Came back, started going to a local community college, and I met one of the best teachers ever, English teacher, but was covering on a lot of old manuscripts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, Shakespeare, Homer, the Iliad. And he really ignited something in me that loved the metaphor of ancient texts and stories. And I started thinking like, oh, okay, this is really interesting. Is this character actually going through like PTSD in the Odyssey? And I wrote a whole thing called the Odd Essay, and he was like, that was an incredibly unique perspective. I've never had any student tackle something like that, but that was always like every assignment. I'm like, I have to hit this from a different angle that nobody else ever really sees it from. And so a couple of years passed, and then 2020 hit. And just prior to that, in 2019, I had to go through, I can't work. I can't think properly. It was a horrible environment. It was production company. And I am a writer. I am a social person, like acting and whatnot. That's how I connect, is I'm a people person. Like even hanging out with people, different nationalities here, I would glean more like, what's a word that I don't know? What's something in your culture? And I love writing fiction. So I like adapting and hearing short stories. And I was published twice in a row at the school. One was for poetry. Another one was for a short story. And a lot of the short stories are inspired by things that I've actually experienced or I witnessed while sitting in a room. And I started going through 2020, just prior to that in 2019 into 2020, just going through the mental process of like self-therapeutic, what was going on in my childhood, because it was just kind of rush. Now I'm out on my own and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. What's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? Because no one's really ever just sat down and said, all right, you have these skills. This might be a field you're interested in. I didn't have a father figure really for most of my life. So it was more of like, God, what's going on here? And I started doing like a hiatus from humanity. And you'll see that on the top of my profile, I have the black and white picture. And that was honestly what I was going through, was 7 months of just writing, reading, and praying and just processing. I did a ton of reading. Then 2020 hit, and I started looking around and seeing all these people wearing these symbols of fear on their face, and at my church especially. And I'm like, this can't be right. We're giving a testimony of a God who conquered death, and we're over here saying I'm scared every second by wearing this emblem. Like, it didn't make sense to me. It didn't resonate. So as this is all going on, I'm like, what the church is teaching isn't enough. There are people that are literally confused. And I've already, again, as being a big reader, I've always had a thing where it's like, I know trivia facts. I could go on for hours about stuff that I've connected, and names and stories and history. And I started saying, well, you know what? Maybe I should start using my social media as utilizing that. I have a gift with writing. I have a gift at connecting things, and maybe I can start using that as like a witness ministry tool. And honestly, the messages that I keep getting from folks is like, it's helping reach the intellectuals or the cynics that have a hard time understanding, like, oh, that's all churchy, that's religion. And that is the people that God is using to come to my page. Or like, I'll have a pastor message me and saying, well, my brother, blah, blah, blah. And you're really helping him. I'm like, it's good if he's on my page, because every single person I'm talking to here, it's like I'm using it as a ministry. And it's something I've never considered. It's been happening so normally and organically. It's like, I truly think it's inspired. So that's.
So did you grow up going to church?
So yes, but the thing with my dad is that he's one of those people that becomes so dogmatic that when he went to a church, he scouted out, and then he'd bring the whole fam. After 3 or 5 weeks, he'd get in an argument with some deacon or some pastoral guy over some theology thing. And then we would awkwardly just like disappear and find another church. So
was there a particular religion that you grew up in?
Christian, yes. But I wasn't saved until I was 12. Honestly, because I think there was like an inner side of me that I witnessed what he was like. And it just was making me think, it's so hypocritical. Why would I want, like, I'm reading these books, sounds like really great missionaries or stories, and okay, cool. But you as an individual, I can't really emulate that because it just feels not right. You're, and that's a huge thing. I have a huge thing against people or guys that are manipulating a woman in a relationship or trying to be a authoritarian. And I'm over here like, there's leading, and then there's just being a bully. And the fact that he put my mom through a whole, I don't know, I can't come forward knowing what I know, what he's doing possibly with our daughter. I don't have proof, but I have a suspicion. So instead of telling all of her friends, she started drinking. And she's now doesn't hang out with a lady that was been her best kid friend since they were like 6th, 7th grade. Doesn't even call her, doesn't talk to her. She used to work for her for the longest time. An aunt of mine doesn't call her at all. And it's because these people know little trivia things that she let slip when she was, a little tipsy. And
your mom, this is your mother.
My adopted mother. Yeah. And I think go ahead.
Well, let me go back and clarify a few things. So the shooting, that was your birth parents, was that your birth parents that you gave you up for adoption that happened with?
Yeah, because again, both indicted for the crimes that were committed, but I was still able to keep a relationship with my birth mom to this day.
Oh, so I missed that part. They got indicted for having killed the man.
Home invasion. Yeah.
And that's why you had to be given up for adoption.
Yes.
So were they always honest with you about that? Was that something that they talked to you about from when you were young? Did you always know you were adopted and that had happened, or when did that come out?
I knew I was adopted, and we'd go up there and visit my birth mom annually, roughly, or every biannually. We'd go up for a visit, and again, I'm a toddler. I'm just seeing as a really nice lady to visit, even though I know she's my mom. It's again, just as a toddler, you're not really processing all of this, and it wasn't until I knew I was adopted, but they never really clarified why I was put up for adoption. And I was like 16. 15 at the time, when I was right before VBS skit, that I was reading an article at the library, because that was my thing. Instead of hanging out at home, I'd go to the library, read. I mean, as I was telling another lady, I said I felt like Spencer from Criminal Minds, is that my mom is kind of special, but the way I would entertain myself was just always just reading a book, reading another source of anything, you know. And I went to church and we started doing the skit. I came back and my buddy Evan was like, "Are you okay? You seem a little off today. Like, we just made people laugh." And I'm like, "No, I'm not okay. I just read why they went to jail." And it just was absolutely traumatizing for me, because I knew the other cases with some of my sisters that their parents were doing drugs. And so, like, this is not a proper environment, so that, you know, that they seized the kids out of safety for the kids. And with me, it was like, I'm reading that and I'm just like, whoa. Is that where my anger, like, I used to have a huge temper, an anger issue when I was growing up. And when I accepted Christ into my life, when I was like 12, we were sitting at the bench. And when I said that prayer, specifically, I worded it as that, "Lord, I want you to take the helm of my ship," because I was big into pirates at the time. So I loved seagoing vessels and stuff like that. And right when I said that, it literally felt like there was like a dark boulder that just rolled off my back, and I kind of jumped. My dad didn't even see me, and I'm like, "What was that?" That was
Wow.
that's how it was a clarification for me that there was something brooding over me. And I think that's honestly something I inherited. Like, the demon of my father was very much inside of me. And when that happened, I wasn't as angry anymore. I mean, I still angry at him, but there wasn't like an anger where I have to punch something or something, you know.
So how come they both got indicted if it was just your father that shot him? So why did your mother go to jail as well?
Because during the trial, again, she worded it her way, his truth, her truth, both were pointing fingers. The lawyers, of course, were getting involved and saying, "Oh no, you say it was her." And it didn't help that because of her, I inherited this a little bit too, is that sometimes she smiles at the inappropriate moment. And it's more of a like, "I can't believe it. This is the reality right now," or they're just stressed. It's like a stress smile. Like, "Are you kidding me right now?" Like, and seeing that in a courtroom, that didn't help her case any. And some were saying, "Oh no, she was the mastermind." But I just talked recently on Ancestry, like 3 years ago, I got in touch with one of his aunts. And again, I haven't talked to her since, but she's like, "I wasn't sure how much I could relate to you because I never really met you before." But according to her, there were moments where even his parents were scared of the kid. Like, he's always had a really dark possession. Like, there were school bus drivers saying, "I'm not driving the bus if he gets on here today." And I'm like,
Oh,
okay, so yeah, I'm like,
wow.
that sounds like a real champ of a guy.
So was there suspicion that it wasn't really an intruder, that was like a story, or because isn't it legal in some states to shoot an intruder in your house?
No. They broke into his house. The guy came home for his lunch break.
I
He
had it
heard,
backwards. Your
yeah.
parents broke into his
Yes.
house,
Yes.
and your parents shot the owner of the house.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Basically, the owner came in because he was back for lunch break, and he heard the dryer being used downstairs. So he comes over, he's like, "Hello?" And my birth mom was hiding outside. She kind of peeked through the window, was freaked out, and then she started running, and he chased after her. Again, she's pregnant. She's not going to get that far. But again, this is some of it I have to take with a grain of salt, because I know she's traumatized. If she is lying, she's had years to perfect the story, but just personality wise and stuff like that, and knowing now what her past was like and my grandmother was like to her, I'm leaning on the fact that it probably was more manipulation involved, because
Well, and I had it backwards, so that was my fault because
no,
growing up in upside down land, the
yes.
great twist the story and makes it, yeah. So that makes a lot more sense now what you're saying. That
Yeah.
clarifies everything. And so, how long have you been graduated from college, and how old are you now? Like, how long have you been in the work
I'm now
field?
28. I didn't necessarily graduate because 2020 really screwed up the whole campus thing. I was trying to get a religious exemption, like if I don't know what's going into my body, trying to use the, which is true, because if you don't know the ingredients, why would you put it into your body? Our body is a temple of the Lord. So I was trying to go at that route. They never really got back to me. So I was like, all right, I'll just kind of cancel this. And I've kind of leaned into the thing where I don't need it. I would like to continue with Liberty, but at the same time, I know they're planning on crashing the grid and the economy. So I'm over here at the point where, is it even worth it anymore? I wanted to do something in creative writing and acting because I think acting is a great way to emulate like stories. I love writing and I like getting stories that are very Hemingway-esque. That's even what they said about my first short story that I had published. And that's what I was trying to do. I was like, the fact that you just said that is so like inspiring because I like stories that where you're reading the dialogue, it starts making you think, huh, I've never really thought of that before, or that's really sweet, you know? And that's what I think a lot of times when we're looking at acting, a lot of people just think, oh, yeah, I'm going to be a movie star. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, no, no. Even in life, the most minor role that you think you have on stage is one of the greatest things. You could be a contributing character, but the fact that you emulate it in such a way that inspires somebody else.
Yeah.
I take it from a very unique perspective, but I think as Christians, that's especially something that we could utilize, especially since all the Hollywood crap is to indoctrinate us to be illusioned, whereas the other one is to be inspired, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm proud of you for doing that and for leaving school behind because, I mean, I agree with everything that you said.
Yeah.
And what were you studying though for the years that you were?
I was emphasizing heavily at the first school, just getting the basics out of the way. I wanted to do journalism, but the first day in, I was just like, the teacher's more nervous than all the students. That's not something I want to learn. And just the way it was designed, it didn't feel like journalism. I'm very much of, if I had to pick like my journalists that I admire, would be Mencken, because Mencken was one of those guys that goes after everybody, but would write it in a humorous way, the insights that he had of a certain situation. Granted, guy had personal flaws in his life, but I really appreciate the humor that he put in what he was seeing. And then when I went to the other school, I emphasized heavily with the teacher that I told you about, Finkel, because he was one of those guys, like we did Animal Farm one time, and instead of talking, he's like, put all the tables in the class together, put all the chairs around it, and then I'm just going to click some slides, and you guys are all going to talk and decide who's going to be the leader. And then we'd be like talking, and we'd be like, okay, are we doing it right? And he just goes. So we do this for like 5-15 minutes, and he just is not talking, just keeps pointing. And so at the end, he says, so which character are you? It says, you are the donkey. You're the person that's more laid back, doesn't want to get involved. You just follow with the rest of the group. You're so-and-so character because you are the one leading this, and we're going to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's psychology being applied to a fictional book, but to have us think about what we're reading. I'm like, this is phenomenal. And he just was one of those teachers where it's like, I knew he had liberal leanings, but he wasn't so dogmatic where he had to impose that on his students. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he would emulate the ideas, I want you to come to your own conclusions, loved his classes. And I just kept trying to do English as much as I could with his class.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm also a writer. I'm completely uneducated writer, but I've written a lot of poetry. I probably have a couple books of poetry written that I just don't know how to get my foot in the door of publishing.
No.
It teeters more on prophetic. Well, my book name that I haven't put out yet is the Prophetic Poetic, and I've never been trained to write in anything. It's more of like a Holy Spirit kind of connection. Almost like that channel opens up, and things that I never expected to be able to write. It just comes from this deep place of emotion, and I think a lot of times the less education you have in that regard, the better and more creative you can become, and thoughtful. So that's really neat. Good job. Awesome. Okay, well, let's see. So then how did you end up getting interested in all of this occultic Freemason stuff? Like, how did you get that deep into, was it the, the jab and the lockdown and all of that got you studying into that stuff, or were you interested in occultism, Illuminati stuff before that, or how did that all start?
My dad has been always one of those individuals, like he'd be playing and like an Alex Jones documentary or something like that, and he would dabble every once in a while, and I would see it over the corner of my shoulder. I would be very attuned with stuff like Criminal Minds and whatnot, and just understanding the psyche. And for the longest time, I was very much like psychology and relationships. I liked a lot of Robert Greene books and insights, because he'd take like a historical incident and try to explain how it's applicable to something today. And I was during my little hiatus from humanity. I was doing a lot of reading, and I stumbled onto an author by the name of Michael Heiser. And one of his books was going on to the spiritual realm of the Book of Enoch and stuff like that. And if it's even something we should consider. And he started leading me down this thing. I'm like, wait a minute, this makes a lot of sense. If we apply Enoch, and there's a version in Genesis 6:4 where it says the sons of God came down. And I'm like, but every time we do a Bible study or there's a sermon, we skip over that word or that sentence. They just jump into the Noah, build the ark, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait a minute. If God felt that that was important to put in there, shouldn't we explore that? And that's a phrase that's in Old Testament. And we see later on in New Testament that Paul states, behold, what manner the love of the Father, that we should be called sons of God. Wait a minute. Are we replacing somebody that were formerly known as sons of God? So this was starting to make me go down and want to explore what are we getting wrong in the modern church. So I started reading Frank Viola's Pagan Christianity, and I read a lot more of Michael Heiser's work. And then I started in 2020. It came around like literally a couple months right after this. So this was definitely being spirit led. Is that I was just saying, wait a minute. I remember seeing this part, and they said this particular phrase. It was a Zionist phrase, goyim, and then they were talking about injection with people with needles and whatnot, and that's how they're going to actually start taking out people. Is a genocide, basically. If you're Gentile, we can take you out. And if you look up Ted Pike's The Other Israel, you can find it on BitChute. I just did a 10-minute clip on that, and he was talking about how it's totally okay, according to ancient Pharisee Babylonian Talmud, to wipe out Gentiles. As long as somebody else swings the hammer, somebody else does the deed, aka executing Christ, we're absolved of that. Somebody else swung it. We can manipulate the situation to let that happen, but as long as you make the choice or you do the deed, we are absolved of any crime. And this was making me think, we're making a choice about this, and people are willfully doing it. And I'm just, again, I'm looking at my church, and I'm like, you're swinging the hammer, but you're missing all the nails. This is something where it's a cultural issue, and we're not talking about it. There are people talking about aliens coming down, and we're not addressing it from a biblical perspective. Is this something to consider? And that's making me angry. And I'm like, you know what? If I can't talk about it at my church, and every time I ask the clergy individuals about this, like, can we do a Bible? They get upset, or they push me away, or they say, well, we can't have you teaching or anything because you're dabbling into books that aren't biblical. And I'm like, but I've been researching this stuff. Like the fact that Enoch was found with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the other version was found in Ethiopia. So I'm like, well, is there a reason why Ethiopia preserved this? And I'm like, well, let's look at the Bible. Jeremiah 37, it talks about an Ethiopian eunuch talking with Jeremiah and helping him get out, and then he escapes before the city is sacked. Totally plausible. If the city's about to be sacked, you want to grab some historical documents because you don't know how bad it's going to go. Fast forward to the New Testament. Acts chapter 8, Philip with the Ethiopian eunuch reading from the scroll of Isaiah. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Totally plausible. This guy.
So what is goyim?
What is what?
Goyim.
Goyim is a Hebrew derogatory.
That, but I can't remember.
Yeah, it's a Hebrew derogatory phrase for Gentiles, meaning cattle.
Oh, that's right. Cattle. Okay.
Right. And when you did, I know Jesse Ventura is controlled, but when he was doing the documentary, he was interviewing the doctor, and she said her patient, who was one of those elitist people, she wasn't allowed to give a name, but she said it's almost time for the great culling. And he's like, the what? The culling. Like a great herd of cattle, you start thinning the herd. And I'm like, culling, goyim, okay, there's a connection here. And so I started compiling all these vids and it took me almost a year. And actually, this is how I started even getting into podcasting, is I commented under Nick Alvier's one of his posts. I said I did a pandemic timeline of this, and he shared it, and then he's like, could you come on my show? And next thing you know, people were loving me in the comments. He invited me again. And the second time, it's one of his most popular raved episodes. And they were saying, you gotta hire this guy. This is wonderful. And honestly, that episode, there was stuff I was saying, and I'm like, I've never even thought of that before. And again, it's like the writing thing. It's like, yep, that came from you. Yeah. That came from you. I'm watching it again, and I'm like, wow.
Well, right now, what I'm thinking about is you're talking about the goyim and the culling and the killing of Gentiles, and what comes to me is the first shall be last, and the last shall be first, and the mind of our enemy, and how he's gotten smarter over the years, and
Yes.
initially the Jews were targeted, and I was taught in Mormonism that the birthright was in the last days went to the Gentiles because the Jews gave it up. And so, that was what we were taught. The first shall be last and last shall be first meant that, originally Jesus came to the Jews and then he was going to come to the Gentiles.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so it's almost like the enemy knows this to some degree. And so first they had the mass murder of all of the Jews, and
Right.
now they're having the mass murder of all of the Gentiles. Not that they're the targeting specifically.
Ones who are God's people. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I feel like the way that Satan has done that, he's gotten a lot smarter, because he's had to go a lot more covert with the way he's doing a lot of this, because, in order to take out the elect or God's chosen people or Christians, whatever, whoever's worshiping God, the enemy's enemy, he's doing it these days in a different way. Before, they just marched the whole the Jews to the gas chambers and like chattel, and just marched them like out in the open to be seen, knowingly this was going on,
Right.
and killing in mass number. And I feel like today it's being done so much differently through these cults, I know for myself and many other people that I know, survivors, besides the ritual and that it happens underground in SRA and the satanic rituals, aside from that, a lot of the witches covens are trying to kill people now through witchcraft. That's like they don't have to use a physical weapon.
Right.
And if somebody, that's what's so dangerous about being a fence sitter as a Christian, or lukewarm rather. And because if you haven't really chosen and really tightened your covenant, kadosh your life and make that commitment, you're at risk. You're a target, huge target of attack. And, even with the jab, like one of the things that I see is that we're in the season of the dividing of the wheat and the tares right now.
Yes.
And if you haven't made your decision and you are not in that deep covenant, the government's trying to off you, and in one way or another.
Yep.
And the government, the cabal, the Satanists, it's all the same thing,
Yes.
So essentially, they're trying to take out anyone. But my perspective of it is that it's the same thing as in biblical times. God has always allowed the wicked to destroy the wicked. And what does he say about if you're not hot or cold, if you're lukewarm, I would have rather that you were hot or cold, but because you were not and you were lukewarm, I'll spit you out.
Right.
And so you don't have that protection and that coverage because you're like, And
I don't need to be involved. Right.
Right. Which is really interesting because, this is a good segue into let's go in and talk about Nimrod, because eventually I want to get into talking about how God used Esau to take out Nimrod. Esau, who sold
possibly Esau. Possibly it could have been. There's two versions, but I lean more towards the one with Shem. And the reason I say that is because in the Egyptian version, it's called Set was the one that took out his uncle, or Ra. So I'm leaning that it was probably Shem. The Esau one's close, but the Shem one makes a lot more sense because being Noah's grandson or direct son, you would be a little bit more like, listen, nephew, you're really doing some stuff that is like, you're now sacrificing kids. You're now, shedding blood. This is exactly what was happening pre-flood. And you're now like literally building a tower and putting a middle finger in God's face. And he's over here like, no, you're not doing that. I'm killing you. Didn't take out the other half though. Huh?
Where does that record come from? That story that you're...
I have been finding multiple sources. I can't give an exact source for that, but if you do type it in, there's several, I think 3 or 4 pages that I've found where it is actually Shem that took him out. So
have you ever read the Book of Jasher?
I've seen a little bit clips here and there. There's a book that I purchased by Joseph Lumpkin, and he has the Book of Giants, Enoch, and Jubilees and Jasher quotes. So when you're reading it, you're like, oh, okay, compare, contrast. This connects to Genesis. This is in the New Testament phrase. This is a quote that Christ quotes from Enoch in the New Testament. So again, those are things that I'm over here saying. If they're saying the Bible, you can't, you have to rely on it. It's the only thing. But and Enoch is totally not inspired. I'm over here like, technically, it's part of a trilogy because Enoch, Daniel, Revelation. That's the trilogy of always being raised up, seeing what's going to happen in the future for the judgment of the giants and the fallen Nephilim, seeing what's going to be happening with the kingdoms in Daniel and how all that's going to be coming into the future. And then Revelation is the bookend of the final battle and stuff like that. So kind of like, Lord of the Rings in the sense is that full encompassing of what's going to happen, what has happened, and what is to come.
Well, the way I've looked at those records and my years of trying to figure out what Bible to read and what's accurate and what other books are appropriate to be read. If you go into the Catholic Bible, we have, the King James that most Christians use. And then if you go into the Catholic, King James has 66 books, which I find it interesting that 66 happened to be the number that it was left with. And before that, the Catholic Bible, all the other books that are in the Catholic Bible are 70 something. I can't remember the exact number. They're 73 or 6 or 8. I can't remember the exact number. And so I went in and I listened to all of those on, I'm a listener because I'm, being a mom and busybody and stuff. And so I listened to all of the books that are in the Catholic Bible.
Right.
And I found it very fascinating because it's really the same patterns. The books that were taken out of the 66 that we have that are still in the Catholic Bible, they're all of the books that really expose the patterns of these modern day cults that are ancient, and the killing and the murdering and the judgment of God upon them. These are massive records of all of that stuff. And so I found it really fascinating that the Catholics, who are, one of the 5 branches of the Illuminati, and to bring children to the beast, that they can still contain all of those books in their book, but everybody else took it out.
Right.
But it's not like they're really wanting, I can see why they took those out, because they don't want anybody to know the pattern of the wickedness of these cults today, because they're all contained in the books that are in the Catholic Bible. Then you go to the Ethiopian, right? I found it amazing. You should listen to all of them or read them or whatever. I mean, and the way that they're written too, really, it's more like a story. And so the Book of Jasher was fascinating to me because it is all about Nimrod and Esau, and really fascinating. Goes into the record of how and why he killed him,
right?
And also about how Nimrod inherited the garments that Elohim made for Adam and Eve through Ham. And I thought that was fascinating because when Esau killed, well, this is what the Book of Jasher says.
Right.
When Esau killed Nimrod, that he took those garments and went and hid them. And that was why he ended up selling his birthright. Well, that's why Esau sold his birthright to Jacob, because he had just killed Nimrod and cut off his head, because they were both mighty hunters and they used to always see each other out in the forest. And so he stole his garments, and they were thought to have had power because they were made by Elohim and given to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so I found that fascinating because in the cult that I grew up in, we wore a garment. I don't know how much you know about Mormonism and the magic underwear. Are you familiar?
I've heard a little bit about it. I didn't get too involved because I was like, okay, that just sounds weird.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting part of, what you teach, because the garments that we wore, that we would go to the Mormon temple, and upon either going on a mission or getting married, you would do what was called initiatories. And
Yes.
so initiatories is where they give you the garment for you to wear daily. And when you go in to do the initiatory, it's an initiation. So you're being initiated into the rites of Freemasonry in the Mormon temple when you are given the garment. And the garment, on each nipple, there's a compass and a square, one on each nipple. And then there's a line at the knee. So as a Mormon female, I was initiated into the rites of Freemasonry and wore the compass and the square daily on my body for years. And in the Mormon temple, these garments that we would wear and be given, in the movie that we would watch, when you go through to do a session in the Mormon temple, there's a movie presented. And back in the day before they started it being as a movie, it was just actors in their white suits, actors playing it out and reading a script. But they turned it into, full-blown movie 30, 40, 50 years ago. I don't remember when the first ones came out. But it's a whole symbolic pattern. It was the story of the Garden of Eden. That was what the movie was. And it was all about Adam and Eve and the creation, and the giving of those garments to Adam and Eve when God made them to cover their nakedness because they were ashamed. So we wore a garment in the Mormon temple that had the compass and the square on it that was supposed to symbolize these garments that it says in the book of Jasher that Esau ended up with, that Nimrod had inherited from Ham, that was passed down from Adam and Eve to, hold on, I have right here the whole pattern of everybody that they say it was passed down through. And it was super fascinating to look at the lineage of this, because it blew because I feel like it relates to what you talk about with the Nimrod cult and Mormonism, and why Mormonism is also one of the 5 branches of the Illuminati, and why they wear this garment and the compass and the square. And that Esau, in the book of Jasher, having been said to have killed Nimrod, that he stole these garments from him, and that they were like a prized possession because they felt like they carried power, which was what we were told in Mormonism, that our garment was our protection and the power. There were stories in Mormonism about how somebody would be in a fire, get in a car accident, and the car started on fire, and their body burned everywhere except for where their garment was covering them. So that's why they call them magic garments, right? So they were given, it says they were given to Enoch, and then he gave them to Methuselah. Noah took them to the ark, and then Ham stole the garments from Noah, and then Ham begat Cush, and in secret he gave them to Cush, and then Cush begot Nimrod and gave him those garments, and then Nimrod became strong when he put the garments on. In the Bible, when it says that Nimrod began to become a Gibberum, or a mighty man of old. I've heard a lot of other scholars talk about how, like, what did that mean, that he began to become a Gibberum, or a mighty one? And that was when he started. Well, this is kind of what I tend to believe. I'm not sold on it, but that he started doing the sex rituals again with the fallen, that they're still doing today, because a lot of the occultists today still talk about how they call on the fallen ones in these rituals. And that's where, the power comes from, is through the enmeshment of the soul with, the spirits that they call into these ceremonies. And that, was that he put these garments on, and that, that was where that was passed on. So I just found that as a really interesting union between Mormonism and the Nimrod cult, and why I was so fascinated with the patterns. So then maybe, anything that I said you can talk about, and then maybe you can go into exactly what the Nimrod cult is.
For sure. I was thinking about some stuff already that you were saying. This is something that I stumbled upon, and I do not know if it's true, but It makes a lot of sense. Knowing that Nimrod is it's the unholy trinity. You have Nimrod, you have his son Tammuz. You can find him in Ezekiel chapter 8 in the Bible, and you can find Semiramis. Semiramis was the wife of Cush, and Nimrod married his mom. So there's the first incestual relationship. So like I know a lot of people are saying, oh, you know, that's so weird that Adam and Eve, like their kids had sex with each other. It's like, well, think of it like this. You have an original copy. And for the first 5 or 6, it's okay to, you know, it's going to look great. But after you get like 10, 12, it starts getting a little funky per copy that occurs after that. So that's the way it's been explained to me, is that genetically that wouldn't make sense. And there's a reason why God said, all right, we're done with any, you know, family members having sex from here on. But what Nimrod did, having sex with his mom, that was a middle finger to God. So it's said in the lore that I was reading that Nimrod was given a bow from heaven, and this bow was said to take out an angel, and that could actually pierce an angel's body and whatever, kill it. This is according to lore. When you look up Baal, the heart symbol that we have for Valentine's Day, that is attributed to Baal. So when you start seeing Cupid with a little bow and arrow, and there's a heart tip, and I'm looking at the depiction, and when you see baby Tammuz, he carries the KADOSH staff, and he's, you know, short. He's got little wings behind him. I'm like, okay. And you've probably seen some of my posts on this. And I'm like, but he's the same exact height as Cupid. And according to this lore, Nimrod was a mighty hunter, and archer is another name for Gilgamesh. When you're reading the Book of Giants, they literally foresee that they're going to die in a flood. Their only hope, they say, is in Nimrod, or aka Gilgamesh, is what they say. You look up Gilgamesh, it means archer. So when you're building the tower going up, now I'm personally, ever since 2020, I've been re-looking at everything, and I don't believe in the round earth. And the reason I say this is when you look up the definition of heliocentricism, that goes back to the Greek transvestite sun god Helios. And any sun god equivalent, Ra, Horus, Helios, Apollo, that all goes back to Nimrod's son, Tammuz. So I'm over here saying, okay, I'm leaning more and more towards the dome, and that makes a lot more sense, because if you're building a tower that's 8,000 something feet up, and God's now all of a sudden fine with satellites and whatnot going up, I'm like, no. So if he's building a tower, he has this bow that said that can, you know, allegedly take out angels. Is it possible he was going to try to kill God? And God's like, you know what? That does it. We're going to actually bust this whole thing up. I'm going to separate everybody. And you, buddy, give me that back, you know, that bow. I don't know how that all went down, but I was like, that makes a lot of sense. It explains how the heart is still a symbol that we see. The lust of the flesh verse coming into fruition with Cupid and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, that's very interesting.
Well, and God did say in the Bible that everything that they sought to do with building this tower, that they could have done.
Yes.
They could have succeeded. So whatever they were trying to essentially break into heaven through, whether it be a portal that they were trying to reach, you know, on the high towers, or through the
in Akkadian Sumerian translation of the original version of Babel, it means portal of the gods. My personal hunch is that he built it over where the in Enoch, it says the Nephilim were locked beneath the river Euphrates. When you look up where the origin of Babel is, I'm like, he's really freaking close to where this was. The giants say our hope is in Gilgamesh. How did they know? Gilgamesh is supposed to be the grandson, or aka Nimrod, so that's supposed to be the grandson of Noah. So how do they know about this Gilgamesh? Is he a messianic figure? Or is it possible there's a time travel thing? Because it says in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he experienced the flood. Didn't die, but he experienced it. So is it possible that somehow there was some kind of like portal crap that they're doing? Like they have all now the churches and little spike and spires up there. They're building a grid. This is the Babylonian grid. I just actually wrote some notes on something I was watching last night that somebody sent me, because I had a hunch, but this thing was confirming it. It was called the Underground Babylonian Circuit Cities. Humans are the electrical circuits that power these systems, and church buildings are likened to the worst sources with their spires. This is by the CPU. I forget what that was an abbreviation of, but it's like the grid for the Khazarian Cabal, and they think that they're the gatekeepers. So we have Portal of the Gods with Babel. We have now this modern Cabal of the Khazarians that think they're the gatekeepers of this great technology. And we have the story of the giants all saying that our hope is going to be in Gilgamesh. In Enoch, it states, I think maybe it was chapter 5, maybe 6, where when the giants are slain, their spirits are going to forever roam the earth. This is where we get the demons from. It's not fallen angels, it's from the fallen giants. And the reason, when we're hearing about people being possessed and stuff like that, that's because of the giants. They're angry, they're mad. They want vengeance. When you look up the Norse mythology, it says specifically that the giants seek revenge for what mankind did to them. When you look up the origin of Og in Deuteronomy, I believe, the children of Israel encounter, he has like the 9-foot tall bedpost, stuff like that. Another lore states that Og, one of the tallest giants ever, survived the flood. And it's possible. Maybe he did with a wife or something by clinging to the sides of the ark. Now it's going to be like, well, most giants are only 9 foot tall. No. These were the great giants. They were said to be up to 300 feet tall. Og especially is what, again, I was doing the measurements. I'm like, so if the ark was this wide and he's 300 cubits, yeah, I think he could possibly do that. And if you're gigantic like that, I think you have the strength to do that for at least 40 days.
Where does that come from? The him clinging to the side of the ark. Where did you say you read that?
Oh gosh, if I could actually start listing all this stuff, you could probably look it up. Just look up Og lore. And I can't remember where I was getting that from, but I do compare contrast, and I start reading, and I'm like, well, this makes sense. That one personally, yes, because somehow they survived after the flood, and if it's only Noah and his kids, how is that possible? When you look up,
I had heard Timothy Alberino talk about that too, and I had questioned. I just said, and I don't know either way, but my question is, God being omniscient, why would he flood the entire earth if he knew that something or someone was going to survive? So then the question goes to, how did the second incursion of the Nephilim come to be again? And, in my studies, I had kind of come to the conclusion, consideration that it was through Nimrod and Ham's line, because I had read and heard, well, if you go and you read just directly from the Bible, Ham, Shem, and Japheth all received, let's see, Shem was the one who was blessed, right? Shem was, and so Shem was blessed, and Ham, uncovered his father's nakedness and had that whole experience. And recently when I was reading that again, God's a gentleman, and I felt like there was something more to that he doesn't say besides just oh, haha.
Right.
Because then he went out and he was telling his brother and thought it was so funny. And then or Noah woke up and it says he realized what his son had done to him, and he was incredibly angry. How angry you get just for simply having your skirt pulled out from under you and your nakedness being exposed. How did he know he didn't just roll over? I feel like there was something else perverse that happened there. That's just my kind of feeling.
You know?
What?
My buddy Evan was tacking into this, and he's saying, remember when you become one flesh, it's possible that it was actually his mom. And I was like, wait a minute, what do you mean? He says he uncovered his nakedness, but he's like, remember, they become one flesh. So is it possible he did something with his mom? And I was like, whoa, that would be an interesting take.
Yeah, I mean, anything is possible.
Yes.
You mean that his mom was laying next to him and he did something with his mom by uncovered his father's nakedness through.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I just know that there's something more there then, because then his father woke up, was incredibly upset, and he cursed, not him, but his son. Was it Cush that was his son cursed?
Or Cain or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. And then Ham also received a cursing. I can't remember the details of it now, but their two bloodlines were both cursed, and Shem was blessed, or Shem was blessed, Japheth and Ham's were cursed. And so, you know, what some people talk about is that's where Adam's pure bloodline came through Shem, and that Japheth and Ham would have been the line that the re-incursion of the Nephilim came through, because when he began to become a Gibberim, calling on the fallen ones again, doing the sex rituals again, putting on the garment and feeling powerful because of something besides the Holy Spirit and God being the power. Then from that, okay, then let's see, that was Ham. And then Japheth, that his line was where serpent seed came through, and that possibly it was through their wives, because they took wives that were not of Noah's bloodline as well. And so that's what I've just kind of considered, that, you know, Shem is the pure, well, we know that. And then the other two are where we have the hybrids. We have the serpent seed and the Nephilim seed that are children of Satan, brood of vipers. You know, Jesus refers to them, calls them different things throughout the Bible. And I know in Mormonism, you know, something just from my perspective that got me really studying more deeply about all of this is that the Book of Mormon, that Joseph Smith translated, is a, you know, record. And I had read that record enough times in my experience as Mormonism to know that it's not just a fake made up book. Nobody could make that book up. It's too much truth in it, and there's too much light in it, and there's too much power in it, and there's millions of people that have converted to this religion. There's something about it. And so one day I was just with Holy Spirit getting a download, and I had a paper sitting on the floor, and my kids all have spiritual gifts, and my daughter had a dream, and it was about Nephi. And Nephi is the main prophet in the Book of Mormon. And the Nephites are the main tribe in the Book of Mormon. And it hit me that the name Nephi and the word Nephites is the first several letters of the word Nephilim. And the word neophyte is what the Freemasons use for a newly initiated sodomite. And so I feel like the Book of Mormon is actually a channeled record of the fallen, of the Nephilim, and that these are more tribes of the fallen, and that I actually believe that Joseph Smith is a Nephilim bloodline genetics, and that he was the thing that's fascinating about Mormonism, Brandon, is that Mormonism, you know, when I've compared it to all the other religions and you go to the Bible, Mormonism is definitely, don't get me wrong, Mormonism is a cult and a counterfeit, but they do have one of the most perfect patterns of Jesus type's archetype of the priesthood, because they actually, there's a real Melchizedek priesthood that is Jesus Christ. They have that, a counterfeit. They have the apostles, their structure and the way that it's patterned. They have the gift of the laying on of hands. They do the baptism by immersion correctly. They do give the gift of the Holy Spirit by the laying on of hands. This is all, you know, biblically how Jesus initiated all of these things in the Bible. So it's fascinating that they have this, but I feel like it's the pattern of what Jesus is going to present to us when he comes to bring us, you know, the truth, when it's restored, but they restored it falsely through a counterfeit first, through the Nephilim. And so that's just really fascinating to me, because that got me into this deep study of the Nephilim and why Mormonism and the Freemasonry and Mormonism and the occultism that I experienced, you know, in my life growing up, and the way those patterns work it's a little different, but it all it points back to Nimrod and this cult and how it branches out in these different branches of Freemasonry. And, you know, essentially people always go, is Freemasonry in the Bible? Well, you know, when Jesus talks about the builders and he says that the cornerstone, they rejected the corner, you know, like the builders that rejected the corner was Jesus Christ, which tells you that Freemasonry is Luciferian.
Yes.
And that's their other name. The Freemasons.
I'm so glad you actually tapped into I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, guys, that's the whole thing. What is it? Building back the tower. They're grabbing all the remnants by diluting what is there with an unholy trinity and bringing everybody back in through multiple hydras. That's why I tell everybody the Illuminati, Freeman, it's all the same. It's just multiple truths, and if there's so many truths, it keeps you from that one truth that's actually real. It's funny that you mentioned the Nephi part, because to tap onto Og, there was a Native American tribe known as the Oglala tribe. Now, Og, I'm like, okay, interesting. But then the guy at work was saying, ah, la, 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 Allah. So I was like, wait a minute. He's like, yeah. It's like, when you start looking at the phonetics, it's like, oh, yeah, it means this for this. But like when you start translating and you look back into the Bible, you're like, is it possible that these people are still worshiping the giants or the fallen ones and they want to bring back Nimrod? Because again, what I think they're doing via CERN is named Cernunnos. And Cernunnos is another name for Osiris, another name for any god of the underworld. Dispatar, where we get our St. Peter. Dis means set apart, like you were just saying with KADOSH. Mm-hmm. And you also have, so Dispatar, Patar, Peter. I'm like, that's very, very similar. And then when you look up Saint Peter, god of the afterlife, god of heaven. But again, they say, oh, you built it upon this rock. No. When Christ says this quote, he says it at the base of Mount Hermon. Upon this rock, I will build my church. What's significant about Mount Hermon? That is where allegedly the Nephilim, or the fallen ones, were cast down. It's like, okay, that's not relevant. Why is the UN's tallest base built atop it with a star of chaos in front? Why is the number 33 so sacred to them? Twin towers? That was exactly 33 years, 33 degrees of masonry.
33 years. What was 33 years?
From 1968 to 2001, the fall of the towers, it was exactly 33 years.
Okay.
Again, these people are notorious for their cults. Like I just did another one, and I messaged with a lady in Australia, and we started talking about the 3 pillars. And I was looking at, there was a lady who sits at the top. There's a young man holding an anchor in the middle. And then you have a guy pointing this way on the bottom. And I was trying to think, I'm like, okay, well, that could be Virgin Mary. And that's another name for Semiramis. She was known as the Queen of the Heavens. And I do have a video on this if you want to cross-reference it with sources. And so is Isis. So is Ashtaroth. So is Ishtar, where we get Easter from. They all, and the Virgin Mary is known by that by 1950-something, 52, 53. They made the Virgin Mary the Queen of the Heavens. I was like, well, there's no coincidence, because they've already been kind of doing that with the crescent moon underneath her feet.
Who's they? Like the cults? The cults like
Catholic Church.
perverted her name by calling her that?
Yes. Okay, well, again, when you look up, so she's known as the Queen of Heavens, but when you look on the Witch Coven website, they accredit Ashtaroth for the pentagram. And you can buy a sigil of Ashtaroth on Amazon and cross-reference what I'm saying, and it'll literally say sigil of Ashtaroth hoodie or t-shirt or whatever. So that means Nimrod's wife is accredited to astrology or whatever, Queen of the Heavens, the signs. And God says, don't be like the pagans in Jeremiah who are awed by the signs and the stars and whatnot. He says, don't be like them. And then you have Nimrod's star, which is the hexagram or Saturn star, which is the star of Remphan in Acts 7:43. And in Amos, it mentions it, that this is the star that your ancestors were worshiping, yada, yada. And then
AKA the Star of David.
Yes.
They've tried to religionize.
Yes. And that connects to the Khazarians. And in the very center, it's kind of almost like that.
Which star belongs to the Jews who say they are Jews but are not Jews, but are
right.
of the synagogue of Satan.
That's what I'm saying, guys. It's like a veil. They put a veil over, and then we're over here saying, "Oh, we need to fight for God's people." It's like, like I was telling a guy at my church, he's wearing a little pendant with the Star of David flag and an American. And I said, "You do know what that that star represents, right?" And he goes, "Star of Nimrod, the Star of Remphan and Acts." He goes, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think people are awake, because I'm telling you.
I know that I have to be really careful, because, like, I used to wear that star. I loved the Star of David because I love David and I loved the Hebrew way, and
right.
was all about a lot of that. And I also have to tell you, it's kind of funny because I was looking at some of your posts the other day about the caduceus.
Yes.
And I actually have the caduceus tattooed on my bootay. It was the first tattoo I got when I was 18. And because I wanted to be a nurse, and then I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be I was going to go to medical school and be a forensic pathologist to do the grody job of, what's it called when you do the autopsies. Yeah. So anyway, I was just always had a healing thing in me, and that symbol, was something to me. And then later, because I just always attributed it to healing, because that's where I thought they had it, because it symbolized, healing for whatever reason. But as I grew in knowledge year after year after year, like, I started to learn more about it, and it kind of freaked me out. But it's also really interesting because it's the sign of Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is one of the constellations that's the double serpent. But I was always taught by my father, and I don't know where this comes from or where my dad got this from. I thought it was maybe something from the Book of Mormon, but I can't remember anymore. I used to know the Book of Mormon really well, but got kind of washed up my mind. But he used to tell me that, that the serpent was originally a symbol of Jesus Christ, and that was why Satan appeared in the Garden of Eden to Eve in the serpent, because in the Garden of Eden, and this is in one of the ancient texts that I read, that I don't know if it's accurate or not, but it said that in the Garden of Eden that the serpent was the highest beast of the field because it had wings originally, and that it flew. And so that's where the seraph comes from and all of that, and the flying fiery serpents, but that it would fly. And so what my dad taught me was that the serpent was above all things, below all things, because Jesus descended into hell when he died. It was throughout all things, because we're all given the light of Christ. And, within, above, below, within, that the serpent is the only animal that can really climb up above, go down in the ground, and in and out of anything. And so it was a symbol of Jesus Christ, which was why Satan chose to appear to Eve and tempt her, because she would be more likely to think it was, I don't know, a seraph or an angel or the Lord. Right. And so, and I don't know if that's because, come to find out, my dad's a Freemason, and I don't know if that comes from some occultic thing.
It does. That's Kabbalah. Yeah.
Is it? That's a Kabbalah teaching?
Oh, yes. I did a post. Yeah, in Bloody Zion, I took a post of that, and then also in the book with John D, which will connect with what I was just talking about. Kabbalah basically teaches that the serpent is that he can't come back unless the world is in complete chaos, and or it's like all sin has been absolved. And of course, the serpent for them is who I highly suspect is Nimrod's son, because Semiramis, when she came into power after Nimrod, she basically was like, okay, this dope kid, he doesn't really have what it takes. And allegedly, she was going to go and become the goddess of the underworld and join Nimrod. And then she came back from whatever practice she was doing. Probably, I'm assuming it was probably doing some kind of conjuring thing. She comes back and finds Tammuz sitting on her throne, all like gleeful state. And she's like, this is how you're mourning me? Okay, that's how you feel about me. He's like, I'm sorry, mom, blah, blah, blah. So she takes him or sends him out to do a hunting, and he ends up getting killed by a boar. Now, this is where we get the 40 days of Ash Wednesday or whatever, and you can only eat ham. That comes from that, because he was killed by a boar. So it's kind of a little bit of a middle finger of killing my son. In 40 days, he was killed in 40 years. That is on his 40th birthday. Now, allegedly, he was killed. The other version is that he was badly damaged, and that the trade that was made is that Semiramis said, I'll give you my son, who's the first product of incest, in exchange that I can have like a rule, or like I'll become an icon and stuff like that. And that was the deal that was made. Again, when I see baby Tammuz, he's holding the caduceus staff. And when you hear about Hermes, who's supposed to be the intermissionary between the gods, he's always carrying the caduceus staff. I said, well, if you're in between the fallen Nephilim and up above, or down below, but they're always saying it's up above, like aliens, look up, look up, look up, but it's actually down below. I said, this is interesting. But when you watch the movie Expendables 2, the bad guy has a tattoo of Baphomet on his neck, and he goes like this, he shows his little neck, and he goes, the goat, the pet of Satan. And I'm like, you didn't say it was Satan. So why is it a pet? And I started going down a little rabbit hole, and I'm like, wait a minute. Is it possible that that's his Antichrist in the future? Because when you look up Apollo, sun god, when you look up Helios, sun god, but Apollyon, son of perdition. We already know Nimrod is the first son of perdition, but everybody's saying it's going to be Nimrod. I'm like, no. I think it's going to be Tammuz. Because when you look up all of his stuff, it's parallel with Christ. Adonis, what is the other name? There's so many names that he has, but there's another one where he is the god of shepherds of goats. In Matthew, it states separating the sheep from the goats. When you look up
Tammuz's of the goats?
Yes. Or whatever god equivalent of that, Jermazid, I think it was.
Wait, so you're saying Tammuz is the shepherd of the goats, so you think he's the Antichrist spirit, not Nimrod? Or what?
When it says that Satan will rise up, the beast. Again, Baphomet is depicted as a beast. He's got wings, baby. Tammuz had wings in depictions that you see him in. And I'm going to try to look at my post because it's fairly recent. I should be able to find the exact name.
While you do that, I have a couple questions because
sure.
Well, and just with what you're saying with the beast, I've kind of started to come to the opinion only recently that the beast is many beasts. That it's a culmination of all of these, the Baphomet, the Baal, the fallen ones, these spirits of these Nephilim that are tied under Euphrates.
Yes.
That the beast is a collaboration of all of these, and I don't know particularly one to the other what their specific roles are per se, but I've kind of started to think that the beast refers to just like the satanic system of the dark kingdom of darkness. And so Sumeri, wait, what's the name?
Sumerian?
Sumerianus? No, the name of the woman.
Semiramis. S-E-M.
Semiramis.
Semiramis. S-E-M.
Okay.
I-R-A-S. Semiramis. Okay. Yeah.
Semiramis. So she is the daughter of Nimrod and his wife. And when you talk about Nimrod,
she's the daughter of the one that was right before Cush. She was Cush's wife, and then Nimrod married his mom.
His own mom.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so does Nimrod's wife have a name?
Yeah, Semiramis. That is her name.
Oh, that is her. Okay, that's what I was asking.
Yes.
So did you say, is that in the Bible that he married her and that it was his mother, or how did you get to
Ironically, it's not, but in every freaking lore, it's there. A good book that does this in a comic version is by David W. Daniels. It's called Babylon Religion, How a Babylonian Goddess Became the Virgin Mary. And it explains it a little bit more in depth. But historically, she's always existed, and then she married Tammuz, her son. So these people from day one were consulting the Dark Ones. And to just throw this in real quick, the star of Remphan, or the Star David, was on the outside. Pentagram was in the center, and in the very center, it's kind of like a circle, so it could be representing the all-seeing eye, which would be Tammuz. And there's another reason why I suspect it's going to be Tammuz as the Antichrist, because they're always doing this. And the first deal ever made with the devil was with Tammuz, and his symbol is the all-seeing eye. So I'm like, okay, is that a little bit of a nod of the one that is to come? When you look up CERN, again, 666. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying it's mark of the beast. I'm like, it makes a lot of sense. But
so when
John,
you say that Tammuz would be the Antichrist, are you referring to his soul coming back and meshed with a human being?
Yes, 100%. That's exactly what I think they're doing with CERN. Is that's one of the first things we did over when we sacked Iraq. First thing we found was a big giant tomb of a person that was in, of course, was like a sleeping status or whatever, and this big bearded guy on his belt, he's got like a little buckler of a fish, which matches with the Dumazid legend of his dad being a fish god. When we get the Starbucks logo, there's another rumor or lore of Semiramis or any fish god culture. That's where we get the little Petrus hats from the Vatican. that all goes back to that religion. And I was like, okay, well, that matches as well, that they're trying to resurrect something because they're always trying to contact the other side. But I think they're trying to bring back somebody. And considering their logo is 666, just spread out all the way up, I'm like, yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do.
It's always a perfect counterfeit. And so if Jesus Christ is coming back resurrected, then certainly they're going to try to bring back somebody resurrected as the Antichrist. And the only way
spirit,
they can do
because
that,
they can't bring back an actual life. They can only indwell a spirit.
So, what were you going to say about John a second ago? You said for John.
John D. He's of the Elizabethan era. He's originally known as the original 007. That is actually how he signed his name. And Crowley actually was taking from his works. And what John D. With his assistant, Edward Kelly, they were warging, trying to contact angels with Enochian magic. Now, this is not the Enoch of Noah. This is Cain's Enoch. Enoch, Lamech, all those guys. But apparently, I'm reading another book. I'm not up to speed just yet. I only got a couple pages in, but there was a Brotherhood of Snakes, and he was also the one that is the forefather of forefathers of using symbols in religions. And what the patterns that John D was using was the Star of Remphan, and I have the sketch drawing from the book. And then you have the pentagram, and then again the eye in the center, and then all the zodiac things on side of it. It has those little Masonic crosses all along this freaking sketch, like it's hollowed out, like, you know, hollowed out big bubble letters for how we do our letters. It's all in there is the Masonic crosses. And then you have the names of the devils and stuff like that. Now, allegedly, he was trying to contact angels with Enochian magic and talking to them about how they supposed to live the future. But it's like, I don't know if he knows what he was doing, because some of the prayers he was praying, I was like, you think you're talking to angels because you can't get exactly to God. So there's some kind of mix up already right there with whatever his theology is. And their two requests were for blood, and that all the world religions to become one, so that will spur on the apocalypse. I said, that doesn't sound like heavenly angels. That sounds like the ones down there. And considering you're using both the sigils of the occult of Semiramis and Nimrod's stars, I'm thinking you reactivated, basically, for modern occult, what was going on in Nimrod's day. Now, granted, it was kind of sparsed out, and a lot of it is, like I mentioned in the comment back to you, the Druids preserved it in Ireland and Germany. And then they took that from the Mesopotamian region, because we hear about the snake staffs coming from Egypt with Moses's battle. And when St. Paddy, we were over here drinking and think it's Irish Day or whatever, it's like, no, he was known for driving the last of the snakes out of Ireland. That is referring to the Druids, because they were very parasitic, as that any culture they were in, they'd whisper in the king's ear, the queen's ear, and dictate what was going on in the courts. Where we get the Hollywood from, the illusions. They were the mages and whatnot. They would be the ones kind of dictating what was going on and how we see things. Again, modern day Hollywood much? So when St. Paddy banished them out of there, they were known as the snakes. So again, it's connecting all the way down to Mesopotamian and Babylonian region. You look like you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. So
yeah.
This is just out of my curiosity what you think about this, because this is what I always wondered, because this was another part of what my dad told me. When Moses was told by God to put the serpent up and to put on the staff so that people could be healed and look up there, because, you know, the fiery flying serpents came and bit them. And that's all they had to do was look at it in order to be healed. Now, the Book of Mormon actually has another record of this, and it goes into a little more detail and says that the people died because of the simpleness of the weight, and they would not look. Just all they had to do was look. But because it was so simple, they died.
Yes.
Because that's not, you know, they just wouldn't even look at the snake.
Right.
So that was another reason he told me that Jesus was the symbol of the snake, because that was why Moses was told to put the serpent on the staff, so they would be reminded to look to Jesus Christ. And it was so simple to accept the blood of Jesus that was their reminder. And so, and it makes a lot of sense. And so why do you think that God chose a serpent to put on the staff to heal the people for Moses?
A lot of this stuff you see as parodies, because even, and again, that's where I'm going on to it's a mosaic. When you look at all the biblical metaphors, and as a writer, I love looking for that stuff. You look at the Garden of Eden to the Garden of Gethsemane. I call it Between the Gardens. There's so much symbolism there. But to get to what you're talking about, the cross itself comes from the Assyrian Babylonian region. So I'm like, okay, that's very interesting. Does that connect to Tammuz? Because it's the shape of a T. I'm like, that's very interesting. So with Abraham, when he was sacrificing Isaac, what was he doing? He was testing, saying, are you willing to do to the extent these other people are doing with Semiramis and Nimrod? What I personally think the occult with adrenochrome, I think that spawned with Nimrod has now gone to the other side to continue his life and to also have longevity for yourself. Give us your child and it will help prolong his life. And yet I think something like that occurred occult wise. And that's still something that's going on to this day. Again, they're going to call us conspiracy theorists, but it makes a lot of sense for crazy people. So I think God was saying to Abraham, are you willing to do that with your own son, with me? Because I kind of have to counteract this in a spiritual way. And I want to see how loyal you are. So that whole, because they were sacrificing kids all the time. So he's over here like, no, don't do it. I just wanted to test. I wanted to see if you are worthy of this idea that I have spinning around in my head. Then you fast forward to the symbol with the snake cross. Again, snake connects to Tammuz or the KADOSH staff, ironically enough, or in the dollar sign. And again, look to the cross. And I have a picture of where it has side by side, where it has the snake staff and then Christ on the cross. What technically is the cross? It's a T, Tammuz. If that's, again, this is mere speculation, but it would make a lot of sense because it mimics what we see in Narnia with Aslan being sacrificed on the altar. Don't quote the dark magic to me, which I was there when it was written. I was over here like, whoa, if you're putting your own son on a man-made symbol as a little bit of a phallic symbol or the religion that they created, and basically saying, you know what, I'm willing to put my own son on your guys' own altar or representation of pain, anybody who hangs from a tree, that verse. And I did it out in the wilderness. I mimicked you guys saying that this is totally possible. And then I did it again by putting my own son on your altar. There's nothing you guys can do because I just played your own game and I won. So for me, I'm seeing it like it's like he's playing poker on 3D chess. He knows what he's doing with the symbolism constantly.
So
Same
the
thing
cross.
with, yeah.
So let me get what you're saying. Are you saying that the cross is like a symbol of the altar of the serpent?
Yes.
And so the serpent being on this altar is showing this altar that's the serpent's altar where they would lay Christ's life down. That's why they were looking, that's why Moses would have chosen this, or why God would have chosen this to be the symbol that would heal the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it honestly was a metaphor by God saying, you know what? He can play games, I can play games too. But the thing is, you guys are so dumb, you're not even willing to look at it and think that I'm the one that's indwelling it. Because spiritually, when you start looking at I think you commented on this one with the origins of communion, is that whole symbol of what was going on with that is that God's been divorced. Everybody's going to be looking at me like, that's heresy. Jeremiah 3:8, I have given Israel the bill of divorce. Okay, that's not true. The 10 Commandments was a bill or a contract of marriage. If we look, you can look up Brandon Robbins, and that's spelled with 2 B's. He did a video on this, and I reposted on my Instagram. So again, I'm doing it for Christ, so I hope he doesn't get me for plagiarism. But I was resharing that because it's very potent when we understand those were the tenets of what I'm expecting in this relationship between you and me. And after all these years, he's like, you know what? I'm done. So I'm going to send my son. And this time, people have to choose and show their loyalty. And again, with the whole communion service, so just to brief it down, is that the dad would pick a young man in the town, make sure he was eligible, he could provide, had a good reputation. And then he would bring this man to the house, pour a glass of wine, hand it to the man, and then he'd hand it to his daughter. And it was here where she had the right to say, you know what, I don't choose this, I don't want it. It was honorable, it was accepted. Okay, we'll find somebody else. But if she chose it, they would add on to the family's house. Mm-hmm. Now, this is significant because when Christ is saying to his disciples, I go to prepare a place for you. This cup is my body. And then he says, Father, if this cup could pass from me. And then later on, again, this is where people, especially denominationalist churches, that a woman can't preach in the church. I think totally she can. A man should lead because that is supposed to be his mission, but he shouldn't be a bully. That's not what that verse is implying. Lay down his life as God did for the church. When you look at communion now as this way, totally debunks that. I think women totally can contribute to what's going on in the church. If they have a vision, if they have, your writing, contribute that. That's the body of Christ. And when we start understanding the symbolism and the metaphor of that, we start going, oh, wait a minute. So that's a symbol that I am choosing that cup. I am choosing the Son of the Father. Again, that's where I think the Trinity actually came into being. Not Old Testament. I think that's only New Testament because, again, I have given my Son. I and the Father are one. Never says that any time in the Old Testament. And I think this is what was throwing off the Pharisees, as they were saying, there's no way you're a son of God. Yet every single one of those demons, aka giants, the son of the Nephilim, they knew who he was. Why? They were sons of God. They were, again, Genesis 6:4. It starts coming full circle. So what are we now? Well, what Paul says, it's a great mystery, but behold what manner the love of the Father, that we should be called the sons of God. We are now indwelled. The ripping of the veil in the temple. No, I'm going to be doing a video on this because everybody keeps asking me about something, and I'm like, I think we need to emphasize this because no one seems to get the metaphor of that. Used to be only the Levite tribe, the priests, could go in there, the Holy of Holies. They could have access to God. When that was ripped in two, now we get the verses of, know ye not, your body is a temple of the Lord. Greater is he that is within you. So when people are calling church buildings now God's house, I'm like, no, it's us. It's a luxury. We have a building, but it's us. And I think that's where you tapped into earlier by saying separating the wheat from the chaff. People, you're going to want to seek the real message of what is here because all that is bull. There is something so much deeper of being indwelled with the Holy Spirit that scares the enemy. That we can't be deceived. The ones that are actually seeking and searching the scriptures, few there be that find it, they can't be deceived by all the other distractions in this world.
Well, I know all about that because of going to the Mormon temple. And, it blew my mind when I actually left the Mormon church and started, just really studying only the Bible and put away the Book of Mormon, how there's several verses in the Bible that say God does not reside in temples made with human hands.
Mm-hmm.
And, like everything before Christ was pointing to Christ.
Yes.
And outside was tangible, was temporal. And everything after Christ was inside
mm-hmm.
and was spiritual. And that's what changed. Yeah. Like you said, and now that resides within us.
Yes. Or it can reside within you if you actually are seeking it. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is that's the metaphor of the sleeping bridesmaids is that you got the lamp, but you ain't got the oil. You're not paying attention to what it means. You have God's word, but you're falling asleep.
Well, and that's the problem is that everybody wants a lamp. They want it to be out here. Everybody, and that's what's so hard about technology and these screens that we have is it brings all of our attention to the external world. And everything is supposed to be happening inside of us.
Yes.
And that birth and that communication. And, even with hearing, like so many times people want to listen to somebody else, or I find myself even still getting caught up on, the Bible, how it talks about not relying on the arm of the flesh and having grown up in a religion that has prophets. I mean, even though there were false prophets and even though other churches have pastors and teachers, like the Mormon church, the way they raise up the Mormon prophet is much higher than, the way typical Christian churches put their pastor or whatever on a pedestal.
Yes, as an intermediator.
Yeah, because he's supposed to be receiving modern revelation for the whole church, today, in order to give us new revelations, that don't necessarily line up with the Bible. So I used to go in the Mormon temple seeking to feel something, to learn something, to receive something. And it was really strange because I just would feel cold there. Oh, which is interesting because I was really seeking a vision at one point or something. And it was when I was a big prepper, when I was preparing for end times. And I was gathering I bought buckets and buckets of wheat because Mormons are big on all of that stuff. And I had bought these big tents and, solar stuff. And I was just gathering all of that stuff. And so I was in the temple, like asking, is there anything else that I need, if tribulation comes? And I literally had a vision. The only thing I ever got in the temple the whole time I was there was a vision of a pair of sweats. And it was like, and it just hit me right now. I've been asking God for that for a while. Why was it a pair of sweats? Because I literally went home and bought like sweats. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess we need some sweats to put in our emergency supplies. But it was like, literally like, it's cold in here. It was for the temple. Like, it's really cold in here. My spirit isn't here. He was telling me then, like my
Right.
spirit's not here. It's inside of you. And
Yes.
I was gonna go to several temples that week and do like a different jumping city to city. And I lost my temple recommend in the first temple that I went to. You have to have your little Mormon temple recommend to get in. And I lost it. And it was so weird because I didn't take a lot of stuff. I knew exactly where I put it and it was gone. It was nowhere to be found. It wasn't in the clothes I rented. I looked through everything. It was gone. And I went home that day because I couldn't go to any other temples now. And I laid down and took a nap because my kids were with a babysitter. And I had actually bought a journal and put it by my bed because I wanted to start seeing if I could remember my dreams to start keeping a dream journal.
Right.
Well, that was the first day I literally started having visions and dreams and started writing them in my journal at home. Like God took me out of the temple, took my temple recommend, and I saw him. I actually saw a picture of his hand. He showed me a vision of his hand with my temple recommend in it. And he was showing me, I'm taking this, go home. I'm inside of you. You don't need to be there to talk to me.
That is awesome.
So yeah, so that was a really beautiful experience for me when he started taking me out of Mormonism, because he was showing me, that those gifts were there and accessible at any time, that I didn't have to go anywhere for that.
Right, and you don't need man to do this for you. That's awesome.
So I want to hear now about, so this, we kind of set the scene for, biblically speaking, who Nimrod is, and why he's an important player in this cult that we're going to talk about, which you see now out in society, in Hollywood, in the government. How does that translate? Well, okay. And before we go over into that, I want to talk about incest for a second, but let's talk about how that translates into what we're seeing and how it plays out, these patterns that we just spoke about in modern day, because we have, essentially my first question is, and I know from my experience, but I want to know your take on why do you believe Nimrod married his own mother on purpose, as a big middle finger to create? Why do you believe that he did that, and that continued to be something that the occultists do and participate in? What do you think the purpose of that is? And is it intentional, or is it just a perversion? What do you think that's all about?
It's definitely perversion, and I think that does tap into what you were talking about with Mormonism. Is that there is a definite distinction that they want to pervert God's creation. They want to defy him. This whole thing with the trans movement, the lesbian movement, whatever, I see it more so as that they want you to forget your identity. They want you to forget your purpose. Because I was just reading a commentary by Dr. Ruckman, and he brought, a lot of it is very denominationalist focused, but every once in a while he hits on something interesting from a guy that I follow that quotes him religiously on YouTube with the Real Bible Believers. And he made an interesting distinction, is that God is always a God of separation. He's not a one of joining. The only things that do is man, is that the two shall become one. That's man. Every species, anything that's growing, like the seed can't grow without the ground. It always has to come together. But as creator, he's always separate from all of that. The Nephilim, how they violated is that they had to join in order for something to be created, an abomination. So the fact that we have all these things where people are now becoming so confused at who they are, what they are, what's their purpose, that's the goal. To have them so dumbed down and compliant, forgetting who they are, they're made in the image of God, is that they are susceptible and compliant to whatever they pitch to them. And I think honestly that's what the emphasis of this ritual and inversion of some individuals that we see in Hollywood and Big Mike is that they want to promote the idea is that I do not care about how the creator created me. I'm going to create myself in any image or way that I see fit. And whatever deal I have to make in order to achieve this fame, I do not care. So that's where you get the gravy ceremonies. I'm not sure if you saw that video that I posted.
Gravy? What's gravy ceremony?
In Hollywood, basically all the perversion of how you get up is, you let certain individuals do stuff and they're all wearing masks, so you don't know who it is. But, if you want to go up, you got to let 3 people do something with you. And every time you make a deal or you want to have another rise on the ladder of success or an A-list actor, you probably did some pretty nasty stuff to become that noted.
Why are they called gravy?
It's supposed to refer to ejaculation. Yeah,
okay.
I'm trying to be, but again, that's what they call it. But again, it's just that, oh, that's just gravy and stuff like that. I'll probably be reposting it soon.
Well, so why the incest piece?
Incest, especially that is the biggest one, especially just something like your mom. I think that's especially the core of it, is that the greater the perversion, the greater it is an insult into God's face. Is that's what they're trying to do and achieve, is saying, I care more about the power of the other ones that were than you. And all this metaphors that they throw in with the movies and whatnot is that they're trying to symbolize that Satan is the one that's been being abused. He's the one that is trapped under this little dome, and he deserves to be let out because God's been bullying him. That's honestly what Kabbalah at the end of the day is teaching. Yeah, there's like
I actually this little polyamorous cult that I was recruited into unknowingly outside of Mormonism, just when I was kind of starting to step away, actually believes what they teach in these cults is that Satan is redeemable, that God loves everyone, and that he's going to redeem everyone, and that they have rituals literally planned and set up of how they're going to redeem even Satan. That they're just playing their role. It's just their part in their role. I mean, God said there has to be opposition in all things, right?
Right,
And we would
right.
have opposition if it wasn't for them. So we should be thankful, for that. And so this is this kind of mind fuck, sorry for lack of a better term, twist
right.
why these people are there are literally Christians out there teaching. Well, they're claimed to be Christians, and I actually have interviewed with one of these people. And I believe it's the serpent seed hiding in the Christian church that are teaching about the salvation of Satan. I've heard it myself. I met a girl who believes she is supposed to be a part of a ritual with her own brother incestuously in order to save and redeem Satan. She's the redeemer of Satan. I mean, the stuff that they teach and believe is quite wild. But the thing is that they use God to teach it. And when you are deceived, there is some logical sense. Oh, the love of God, because you don't understand the justice of God. You don't understand the hand, right, and a left hand, and that those laws and rules are there for a reason. So my take on the incest part, I agree with what you said at the end, but I would add to that, that the more of the perversion, the greater the power. And so the whole reason they have these rituals is to immerse their souls with a dark source and a dark power, because then they gain brownie points in the kingdom of darkness.
Yes.
And the more wicked you're willing to go, the more evil and vile, that's, the more
possession,
the more ascension you get in the kingdom of darkness.
Right.
And so that's where you end up with so much of what we're seeing now, because people are so power hungry in these cults, is you end up with all of the incestuous abuse, and then you end up with all of the same sex, and then the children.
Right.
The most vile are becoming now the most common and the most normalized. And that's because man, I believe, has just become so obsessed with power, and
Agreed.
And it's crept up on us because these brotherhoods have remained hidden for so long.
Yes.
That we didn't realize that this world was laced with secret sodomites. Many of us married to them unknowingly, because they're not even particularly gay, most of them, and they don't even necessarily want or care for that. All of them, some of them do, but it's like a business agreement. It's like going and signing a contract at work today. I'm going to show up at work today, and as part of my job today, we're going to have a sodomy ritual. And that was one thing that I learned through my sister, who's still involved in the cult with my family, is that men participate in these rituals at their day job. That's how they keep it hidden from their wife. They can come home and go to bed with you. They can never be gone. You would never suspect an affair. And the only time they're doing this is at work, having sex with other men for power. For power. And that's what Freemasonry, one of the best kept hiddens of Freemasonry for generations. And that's the next influx of survivors I'm waiting to hear from and praying for God to send out is these men to come and reveal that side of it. Because you hear the abused children coming out of it, you hear the wives leaving, but we haven't seen a lot of the men yet who are finally walking away. And I feel like we're getting close to that.
Alan Childs, he did like a 6-hour thing exposing it, and they removed it on Facebook for hate speech. I'm like, there's no hate speech. He's revealing truths and connecting it to the Satanic Bible and everything. So I've been trying to get in contact with him.
I don't know if he just put that out and then went into hiding or what, because I've tried to contact him too.
Yeah.
And like I don't know what happened to him after that video, but that's the only piece of anything he's put out.
Yeah.
And he's the only one who's talked so public, and he doesn't go into sodomy piece. That's the piece I really want to understand, because the magic behind that, the thing that's really fascinating about that to me is because that is what they use in order to communicate without speaking. That's why they're able to take these oaths of silence, and why for generations and generations you have children and sons and coming out of these bloodline brotherhood families, and they don't speak about it because they enmesh them through different types of ritual and magic, often bestiality, with a deaf dumb spirit. So they can't speak about it. Even if they go to, it's like they choke. And I feel like that's God's going to be really doing a big number of pulling some of these men out of there, and the children of that generation who don't want to continue in this. But I also think that's a huge contributing factor to why so many there's so many gay men today. It's incredibly hard for women to find a good man to even be with them, and it's so hard for a lot of women who are even married to men, because they don't realize they're married to a sodomite or a man who's part of a secret brotherhood. And they have no clue why they're, and they're hidden all over in Christian religion. And this is just modern day, and these are the ones that we don't talk about just in our church, that not that we see on Hollywood, not that are out going to rituals, but that are just hidden in society all over the place in the church.
Right.
And that's why there's the gay agenda, the trans agenda. And it's fascinating. My mom told me about those agendas when I was little. Like maybe junior high, she was talking to me about the trans and gay agenda, how they were going to push it.
Right.
And exactly what we're seeing today is what she was describing to me years ago, because she's in the Illuminati. And so she was able to talk to me about what's going on in the exterior world, not in the church at large. We were involved in, but she could talk about it. And I think that was freeing for my mother to talk about it in a way that was disconnected from, to be able to reveal something that she wasn't connected to, because she was connected to it within the church. But essentially, it's all the same thing. It's all the same brotherhood. It's all the same cult. But I want you to talk now a little more about what it looks like in the Nimrod piece, because that was fascinating to me, because there's some specific things that these people do within their marriages and within their family cults that are a little bit more unique than other brotherhoods, right? Like within the Nimrod cult. So can you go into the details of what those things are?
A good thing to note is that even the Statue of Liberty is based off the Greek transvestite sun god Helios. I'm going to be probably reposting that, because again, I keep getting new followers and people ask questions. I'm like, all right, I got to repost, recycle, to get people caught up. But that, again, the
Whore of Babylon, and I had a vision of her literally exploding a few months ago. I was sitting in a chiropractor's office, and I had a vision of the Statue of Liberty exploding into a million.
I hope so. Maybe that's God's judgment, because honestly, I see that, and I also know President Grant was a Mason, because again, Abraham Lincoln wasn't, but when I'm seeing half of his cabinet doing the little, hidden hand thing in their jackets, I'm just like, oh, buddy, you had no idea how close they were, all surrounding you. And I've gone into that in several other episodes with other people, but
well, I mean, the whore of Babylon is what the Statue of Liberty is. That America is the whore of Babylon.
I truly believe so. When you look at all the symbolism on the flag and whatnot, the very IRS symbol comes from Horus. That's the little eagle that we got on there. When you find out the origins of the IRS was by Rothschild agent Jacob Schiff, and they went to Jekyll Island. I would imagine there was probably some perverseness going on, because there's only 8 to 9 guys that went to an island by themselves, and they drew up some kind of constitution thing. I'm assuming that some kind of sodomy one was occurring. And
the flag is 13 stripes.
Yep.
They say it's the 13 original colonies, but isn't it interesting that there's 13 bloodlines, and that the red stripes, it hit me one day. I was just sitting there and I was looking at this flag hanging in my friend's house, and it hit me, and it was just like bloodlines came into my head. And I was like, that's what those lines are. They symbol the 13 bloodlines. Then you have a pentagram over every single state. saying
Yes.
that there's a curse over the land. You know, that's
Thank
essentially
you.
what
Somebody
the flag
that's
is.
yes. And there's if you look at all the flags, pentagram, Queen of the Heavens. It's all going back to Semiramis and or Sun. Like even okay, so we weren't allowed to go in Japan for the longest time, but suddenly Commodore Perry makes some deal with Japan. Well, what was it that you connected with them? Was it the sun god connection that you have of being a Freemason? You're like, you see that little slug you got on your flag? We got that too. You do? Yeah. And now what do we got with Japan? They got some of the craziest technology of preserving people or whatever. And I'm like, there had to have been some sort of deal, I'm assuming, that went down with that.
Do you think
Even
you can
the
get into politics if you're not in a brotherhood?
honestly, that's the you know the young guy that was in a wheelchair. Um, what's his name? The guy that was from South Carolina, the youngest guy ever to be elected to Congress, and the wheel. Remember that
I'm
young
not sure
kid?
because I haven't followed it for years because I voted for Jesus many elections ago. I
That's
literally
awesome.
wrote in Jesus Christ and I was done with that crap.
Yeah, well,
So,
there's some young kid that got up there, youngest guy ever elected, whatever, and he and somebody saw one time that he was wearing a Masonic ring on
oh,
his finger, and I'm just like, yeah, there's definitely like you can get up the ladder like with the Skull and Bones, and they have a thing with Kabbalah where it's kind of like Pig Latin. You can take out some letters here and there, but like the vowels and whatnot, but it'll still be how you translate it. Like even Baphomet, I think if you took some of the vowels out, it translates into some language. Somebody sent me a link, and it would translate to Guardians of the Temple. And I was like, well, that's interesting because King Solomon's ring was originally the Star of David, and it was said that they had the power to help construct the temple, but you basically had power of the demonic spirits to help this be achieved. And now you get the Knights Templar spitting on it and whatnot. But yeah,
well,
I know
so
two
people,
Masons at work. Sorry, I was going to go into what you were asking.
oh, go ahead.
I know two Masons at work, and honestly, I think they have so many levels because they're testing how far they can go and how far they can push you. Like what Adeline said is that he was somebody was a 32-degree Mason, and he still didn't have any clue. So I think a lot of it is testing. Like, okay, every 5, let's see if you're willing to do an act of sodomy or something. But for the most part, they just talk politics. They're testing the room to see if we can go up to the next level with this particular guy. And then they'll probably pull him over and say, hey, you don't want to hang out over here, blah, blah, blah. And it keeps going on and escalating like that. The rest of them completely clueless because it looks very Christ-esque. The KJV Bible is right in the front, along with the Morals and Dogma, I believe, with Albert Pike. And I'm related to Albert Pike. He's a great cousin of mine. Yeah. So I actually take my work as a little bit of a, huh?
I had a journalist that contacted me recently who's also a distant cousin of his.
Pike. Most Pikes in Pikes Peak, Colorado. That's another one.
Oh yeah, I lived right by there.
Really?
From him? Well, my ex-husband, who is a Freemason, worked at the Air Force Academy, and I believe that he went there for part of his training because I know he has. My brothers are all in the secret CIA for Mormonism, and my ex-husband, I'm sure, on some level, is into all of that too because he went directly into and worked for the government, and he has all kinds of secrets going on.
Right.
But we live right by Pikes Peak, and we visited there in Colorado when we lived there. He was kind of obsessed with it, and now I know why.
And again, when I was in college in Florida, I mentioned to the teacher I was related to him. He says, "Do you know anything about the possible plot where he was like if he was part of the plot to separate America with Aaron Burr?" And I was like, "That's a family secret." I didn't really know at the time, but I just thought I would scare the class with, well, what does that mean? But yeah, a lot of it is they're testing to see how far they can carry your career. How far are you willing to do stuff for us to ultimately push our agenda? So like you said, vote for Jesus. Both sides are so controlled. That's why when I'm seeing Trump endorse McCarthy and Pelosi endorse McCarthy, I'm like, guys, if two sides are both endorsing the same guy, that's a red flag. And he's a World Economic Forum attendee. I'm just like, that.
Well, that
they paint the illusion that there's two parties, but ultimately it's the same thing. I would say like 95% on both sides are genuinely part of the occult. There you have like the 2-3% that are oblivious, but they're actually standing for something. And then you got that 1% that's just the gullible dummy that got into the room and they're just voting with the party because that's all they know.
Yeah, so I agree, and that's what I've been telling people for years is you've got two wings of the same bird.
Yes.
And I can hardly even stand to watch it or keep up with it because it's just
Yep.
some of the worst acting that I've ever seen on these stages.
Yep.
And, you know, like none of it's even real. Like they say, oh, this and we're gonna pass this law, we're gonna do this. And it's like I realized a long time ago, I just started becoming really aware that none of that stuff changed my daily life.
Yep.
It really didn't affect anything that I could do or couldn't do. And even when they said it did or would, it didn't. And so
Hmm.
that's why I started seeking eventually to get out from all of that, which was what peeled the veil off of my eyes when God literally like came and like peeled the generations of the sheep's wool over
Seat.
my eyes from my
Yep.
ancestors' iniquity of Freemasonry. And I literally felt it for a week. I could just feel the wickedness and the evil everywhere.
Mm.
And because I just rejected all of that, and I can't watch it anymore. I can't hardly hear about it because it's so fake. It's worse
Yes.
than the worst Hollywood movie they've ever made. The actors are falling apart,
Yep.
and nothing they say makes any sense, and everything is staged and set up, and they plot and pit each other against each other on purpose. And then humanity's like, no, they're better, and we're all out
Yes.
here like, and they're back in the bed sodomizing each other, laughing their butts off that we think that they're on a different team,
Yep.
you know, when really they're all in the same satanic ritual and the same cult in the same, because I don't believe that you can run a huge church or a big part of government without being a bloodline or a sodomite or completely sold out.
Right.
And
Right.
you know, I believe that that's the way they get that power and are given that authority to move up from there is through those rituals, you know,
Hmm.
and those, well, specifically bloodlines. I don't believe that anybody who's been a president of this country ever. And frankly, I used to think for a season, I thought everything had been infiltrated,
Right.
but
Right.
now I don't even believe that anymore. I believe that for the most part, all of the major religions and the government is all run and set up and organized by the Nephilim serpent hybrid
Right.
13 bloodline families that run the world, and that anybody else who makes it into that is either a handler, been programmed, a peon, you know, lower on the
Or
bloodlines.
they're offed.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
And
everything I've looked on with Lincoln, I think he was literally the anomaly because there were so many backbiters going on during his administration. They did not want him to get in a second time.
he has got to be Nephilim. I have a few pictures of him that if him standing by other dudes, and when I look
Yeah.
at him, because this is one of the things with the Nephilim. When I had that revelation that Holy Spirit laid on me about Nephi and the Nephilim and that being from Mormon Church,
Yeah.
pretty soon after that, I was laying in my bed one morning and God just started giving me like these downloads. It was, I have a whole dream journals that I keep, and Holy Spirit just communicates with me in the morning. I'll have dreams or visions or just sentences or terms that will come to me. But this morning was crazy because it was like hours of stuff. I can't even relate it or really explain it to anybody. But he was teaching me about how the second incursion has played out as far as it showing up today. Because, you know, it's not just like, oh yeah, it's here and there in the bloodline. Like
Right.
it's in the Bible that in the time of the coming of the Son of Man, which we are in the last days,
Right.
that it would be as it was in the days of Noah. In the days of Noah, how many did God save? Well, he said Noah was the only pure bloodline left, Noah himself, but he's only saved 8 people. 8. And that's all that went into the ark, you know, was the
Hmm.
8. And so today, if it's the same as it was in the days of Noah, the season of the coming of man, we have developed to the level of hybridization and the what's the word? They've messed up our human genome and our DNA to the level where we've been hybridized, and there's not much pure seed left. And so what God was showing me was how they've been hiding these Nephilim genetics, the serpent genetics, in our bloodline amongst us, because
Hmm.
again, like I said, Satan's gotten smarter. So back in the day, they had giants and they knew who these people were. And when God would send out tribes to kill men, women, and children, the Israelites, to kill off the entire tribe and say, take no spoil, and don't even, keep their cattle or their animals, like destroy everything. That's how defiled these people had become through what we've been talking about. That's a lot of people go, oh, well, the God of the Old Testament, he was so. No, do you think that for when somebody's been raping their own children, feeding them, eating flesh, drinking blood for generations and generations in the same bloodline, that child even has a chance to become a decent human? Like, no. So he wipes out the entire generation, because if you don't know who their gods are, and you don't know what that means their rituals are, so you don't therefore then understand what their sins are, then you're not going to fully understand why God would need to wipe these people out completely.
That's what I tell people. It wasn't manifest destiny. It was like, this is literally screwed up. This needs to go, and I'm going to take my people to do this.
Absolutely. Like there, and we're in that same place right now. This is how he was showing me, okay, this is why this happens in the Bible, and then what that looks like for us today, because it's playing out again. And so how they have done this genetically is that they've taken the giants, which we know that the government still has some of these giants underground.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, in the flesh, not just the spiritual, but the flesh. And these Nephilim, they have immense power, mind power. Like, people say that a lot of people, when they experience them or come upon them, they end up committing suicide because their psychic abilities is insane.
Right.
And so what they've done, because we know the occult is obsessed with breeding and genetics, and they pair up couples, well, not even necessarily couples in Mormonism. There were couples, everything's arranged behind the scenes in the occultism, behind the scenes in Mormonism. But across the land, the genetics, how they from these giants have gotten their seed to come out into, modern society's population, is through breeding with little people. So that, a big, huge person and a little tiny little person who's literally like genetically altered, or has, what do they call them in the X-Men? They have a genetic, all the kids, there's something wrong with their genetics. There's a word for it. I forget. Mutation.
Yes, I think.
Mutants, right? So a little person, mutant, right? Because they didn't grow properly. Like, there's a mutation on their DNA. And so they take a mutant, a little person, and then they take a fallen one, a giant, and they breed them. And then, so they've been able to downsize to where they have the gifts and abilities of the Nephilim, but they're little, they're smaller now. And I actually had this whole vision and download the Holy Spirit was showing me of all of these different traits. And in the book that I have written on spiritual warfare that I put out, it goes into all of these traits and genetics. I've listed them all out in there that he showed me of, it's like the Habsburg jaw of the ancient, well, not so ancient, but the European kings, it's kind of like the Jay Leno jaw, there's a really long chin. There's markers that happen when these incestuous relationships take place. These there's genetic mutations that happen, and not just with incest, but also when you take a massive person and a little person and try to smash a big, huge spirit, soul, fallen angel hybrid into a little tiny body. There's some weird things that happen. And he literally started showing me people in my own personal life who I went to church with, because in the Nephilim Mormon church, these bloodlines are hidden all over. And, they have short arms, they have huge foreheads, a lot of red hair, a lot of really short legs. And so there's just all of these different markers. Well, so they're hidden amongst us all over these Nephilim seed. And then I've also have some personal stories and witnesses that I won't go in because it's too long right now about.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
I have a buddy, Marcelo, and he's been saying that he's very skeptical because he grew up in Catholicism, but he's seen a lot of hypocrisy. So I'm trying to help gauge him through with some of the books that I've referenced to you. But he said that there's these kids that are incredibly smart all over the world and stuff like that. And he thinks that maybe they're going to help fix the future. Is he probably referring to these kids?
Well, I think there's both, because you always have the counterfeit, and then you have God, who has to always one up.
Right.
Before he just wiped the whole world out. I believe personally, what I've seen in my own revelations and what's biblical, and his, rainbow that he gave us in order to not flood the earth again. And now he's going to send fire and try to help us out. And, we know the whole plan that he has of end times and Revelation. And
Right.
there were, people coming back to the church is, and because I also know personally Nephilim bloodlines, and that's the easiest way to tell it is if they are born with the 6th digit. And some people really close to me, their whole family was born with a 6th digit, and they have a lot of these other little markers. And I have a girl who saw one of my videos and called me up. She said she was born with a 6th digit too. And it's pretty common actually. And they just tie a little thing on it and tie it off at birth. And then you never know unless somebody says it. You don't realize that 6th finger is still very much in our bloodlines, common people today.
Wow.
But the family that I know that still has that is, I know that their father is definitely deep into bloodline occultism and Mormonism. And I came across him actually in the middle about to do a ritual upon a kid, and God led me out to written a poem about it called Island of Goats, and what I came upon and landed on there. And so you have the counterfeit, and then you have God, what God has to do, because so the Nephilim come in. They, want to take over the world. Essentially, they're jealous of humanity because the angels, man was made a little lower than the angels, but they were given power over all the earth.
Correct.
And so we have the birthright. They don't. So
you're now the new sons of God. Yes.
Right, but they're more powerful. They
Right.
have an ability because they're angels, because they were meant to serve God.
Right.
And man, is supposed to serve God and in a different way on the earth, and had a different role than the angels. And so they were jealous. They came down. They created seed, took over the earth, made their kings, set up all their kings. Pretty much all of the ites tribes in the Bible, and all of the big king countries were all stemmed from these fallen angel bloodlines. And so God wipes it all out. They make their way back in, and they're incredibly powerful and spiritually gifted. But because God flooded the earth, second round, what they have to do is now they're going to have to hide it better. So they're hiding amongst us. Before they were just these giants. So that's why the big ones go underground, and then they can send the ones up who they've breeded down to the level where they're small enough to hide in plain sight. But then you get people like Lincoln, who, like, I look at him when he's standing next to other guys in the army and stuff, and he looks like Nephilim to me. That's what I was getting at with all these genetics that I've seen. I can kind of look at some people out in public, and I'll be staring at somebody, and I'm like, these 7-footers who we get, like, that's not natural, and
all that,
yeah. So when it comes to the gifts, and that's one of the reasons that God wiped them out, is because they have such an advantage over normal Adam men, because they have spiritual gifts and abilities that Adam didn't attain or have. We have gifts and abilities not to the level that the hybridized Nephilim have.
Which I could agree with you with that being with Lincoln, but I don't think he was part of them. And I think that's why they offed him, because they probably were thinking, oh, we could actually have a shot with this guy, because he's part of them. This could be a shot. And I think instead of doing that, he probably was like David's recruits. A lot of his mighty men that left the Hittites and whatnot. Maybe he was converted, because I've been reading another book about how he's had a struggle with God, but eventually he's like, I'm following God. So it could have been one of those stories, and that's what picked him off.
Could be because a lot of and I've have a lot of personal revelations about people in my own life who are going to try to get out of their bloodlines.
Right.
And that's what I think is going to be a lot of what the warfare that we see in end times.
Right.
Right. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities, because a lot of these human beings who come from these bloodlines, who want to be a seed of Adam, a son of God, who came through the fallen, want out. And in the beginning, God just drowned them all and said, no,
Yes.
you're like corrupt. And they were mixing with animals too, then, which we're starting to see more and more. And
Monsters. Yes.
so, yeah. So they're going to have gifts and abilities. Yes. But that's also, in Mormonism, there was this song that they used to sing called a movie that this Mormon guy wrote called Saturday's Warriors. And, it was always about how those who were saved for Saturday, which is the end, the last day, the end time, who come, are going to be these warriors. And even, there's truths in spiritual paths, other spiritual paths that Christians always kind of go, oh, that's new age. That's new age. And it's like,
Yes.
well, God's no respecter of persons. And I've always believed that every spiritual path has some pieces and parts of the puzzle that others don't have, and always
Right.
poo-poo on because everybody's judging each other. But I do believe in like a generation of rainbow children. And I know because I have children, and not rainbow children of gay, rainbow children of God's promise, who
Yes.
have to come in with less of a veil, more powerful gifts in order to combat and be competitive with these hybrid seeds to be able to survive. So yes, I do believe on both sides that there's a counterfeit of children who come from the Nephilim seed, who have an advantage, who are gifted. And that is also reinforced and upped through the initiations of the Illuminants. That's what
Right.
the neophyte is the sodomite. And they do this from infancy in these bloodlines. They start sodomizing infants with their fingers at birth in order to shatter the mind's eye, to open the mind's eye, to give them spiritual abilities and powers, and so that they can work in the spirit. Well,
Right.
so
Right.
God is going to send down, babies to Christians who are going to be more intact spiritually from birth and have a competitive power against that to defeat that. So whatever your friend was saying, the answer is yes, but then you're going to have your counterfeits too. And what
Well,
God's
so
doing.
would you believe on the there's one guy I was watching at Ambassadors of Christ on YouTube, and he was saying that it's the two witnesses. It's probably going to be the real Jews and Christians, and he took that from a verse in Isaiah talking about how it was like the olive branch that he was referring to, and then and that they're the ones that get activated in the last days for 3.5 years, because then it says then the Antichrist will make war upon the saints. And I was looking at that, and I'm like, well, they're not building FEMA camps for Republicans. They're building it for people like you and me. They're bringing up this stuff, and obviously they're so confident in this that we're not going to be raptured that they're actually building these. So I'm like, wouldn't it be kind of weird if they put us in the camps, and that's when God's like, all right, all my eggs are in one basket. Let's unlock the doors. You guys can be able to breathe fire from your mouths and all that stuff. And like you just said, then that's the counteracting force that goes out for 3.5 years to bring in the last of the last that were on the fence, not quite sure. It's like you're now having signs from heaven. You literally can't deny it anymore, that this is possessed. Then they're going to see the powers on the other side, and that's where ultimately the choice is going to come down. You're being funneled. Choose a side. And again,
Well,
I don't think...
he doesn't watch God, so I could see that playing out, having to explain.
Because again, it says we're not going to experience the persecution of God, but it doesn't say anything particularly about the wrath of man. Maybe it's 3.5 years and we get raptured up because we are technically the new Noahs and whatnot, and so we're not going to have to endure the persecution. But it says he makes war upon the saints. So I look at that and I'm like, it just doesn't make sense that we just get, for me, if it's a spiritual warfare, why are you pulling your forces out before the war gets started?
Right. And this is exactly. And that's a good point. And this is what I tend to believe about that, based on, because I've been getting revelations personally for years on this about my own purpose in my own life with all of this. Right. And based on what the Bible says and based on what he's shown me in my own visions, this is kind of the conclusion or story that I've come to with all of that, is that, like, I don't necessarily not believe in a rapture, but I don't really use that term a lot just because the way I see it is more of like with the harvest, that he's gathering his wheat. And I do believe that there will be a going up. And I don't know what other people believe because I haven't studied a lot about the harvest the rapture. So I don't know if other people think that they're just going to be taken off the earth and be in heaven and now be in heaven forever. But I believe that that what happens with the rapture or the harvest, when he separates the wheat from the tares, that the wheat, his children, Israel, and I believe that it happens in phases. I know a lot of people think it happens all at once, but I believe that it happens in an individual experience between you and God or Jesus Christ. I do believe there's a wedding feast, but I don't know if everybody's invited to the same wedding, or if you're invited to your own wedding with Jesus Christ. Are we all invited to Jesus's marriage to the church, or are we invited to our own personal marriage to Jesus Christ? So are we going to all go together and end up there together? Or are we all going on our own in seasons? Because the harvest and being invited to the wedding feast, I believe, are synonymous with the same event. And I also believe that the second coming is separate than that. The second coming, when Jesus comes back to everyone and every knee will bow and tongue confess, he comes back with 144,000 in a cloud of glory. And by then, I believe that's after the 7 years of tribulation. So I believe that while the wheat and the tares are being harvested and separated, that God is going out slowly and harvesting his fields. And he's a master of the vineyard. So he has many vineyards and many fields that he has to harvest from.
Right.
And so I believe that it will be done in seasons as people are ready and prepared. And there's the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And the reward's the same. And it's interesting that when he called you to work for him in the vineyard, that the people who showed up last got paid the same reward as those who showed up first. And he actually paid the last first on purpose. The ones who he hired last, he paid them on purpose to see if, those that he hired first would judge. And they did. They complained, right? They were like, what? Why did that happen? And so I believe that this is all pointing to pieces of the puzzle of the same story of the rapture, the harvest. And so I tend to believe that our own experience, that we will be taken into an immortal state in order to fight against, and that's what these occultists and Freemasons and bloodlines are obsessed with, is immortality. That's why they drink the blood of babies, right?
Right.
So they want immortality. Well, they can't have it because it can only come through Jesus Christ and resurrection, right? And so, and it's all over in the Bible, and people are always like talking about how stupid it is that the Freemasons all, believe that they can be immortal because we're all appointed to die. Well, actually, we're not. We're all appointed to live. Like immortality is a promise from a covenant with God.
So to be born again.
Right. And so there's the first resurrection.
Right.
There's the harvest. There's the second coming. And so I believe that what's going to happen is that with the first resurrection, I do believe that we are on the cusp of some of our dead coming back and miracles. And I don't know, as far as the second witnesses go, where they come from.
Right.
But I know I've had some crazy experiences in my own life where I've been given promises of certain people who are coming back who have died. Including, there's also Bible verses about women receiving their dead back, their dead spouses and children. And so many of us have had, like, I had a miscarriage. I know that my ex-husband actually sacrificed that baby through witchcraft and sorcery in order to advance, because not everybody who is in a bloodline, when you marry an expendable like me, going to be able to go put a baby on an altar and offer it up to, your false god. So in Mormonism, miscarriages are rampant. And I help a lot of other women and have these other groups where they're going through similar experiences and getting similar revelations, that people who have been married to some of these men that are into these, sorcery cults are doing these initiations through, they're advancing through offering up their own child and causing their wives to have miscarriages through sorcery. So there's biblical promises about receiving our dead back. The first resurrection is part of all of this. And then becoming immortal is part of this. So as these evil powers raise in power, the Antichrist, who's going to have miraculous powers and be doing miracles like Jesus, we're also promised to be exploits, and to be given powers and abilities. So in order for God to bring to even have a church left on the earth at this point, he's going to have to weigh up our abilities. Right. And so I believe that's done through the twinkling of the change in the twinkling of an eye. Right. And that all of these different allegories in the Bible are pointing to the same thing. And I don't necessarily think that it all has to be on one day, that everybody's going at the same time. that there will be phases and seasons of changes of God calling his people, bringing them together. And I do believe that there will be people be able to come back and forth from heaven, and they'll be sent out on assignment to
Well, there's
fight the
something I
battle.
would tap into is that if it is a dome, and this even goes into Dante's Inferno, but it was saying that paradise is actually like there's a plain and a huge valley where like this is hell, and up above the paradise is representing Eden, because that's what it's called. When Christ is on the cross, he says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." So there's like a waiting room. But again, there's no death, there's no crying, there's no pain. But before we go to heaven, there's like a little courtyard, which is Eden, where we can dwell when immune with him. But like you were saying, slowly being called up, slowly to the other side. And this even taps into other mythologies with, was it the Odyssey, where he was seeing somebody from the other side? But again, that's underworld, because he can't get, access to Eden. Eden is only reserved for those who are set apart. The dispensational with Noah was obeying God, with Abraham, like everybody has their own little thing, but it's like, I want to see your loyalty. I want to see what you're willing to do for me. And that's where you get the parable of the talents and whatnot, and the sleeping bridesmaids. And even when the imagery of Gethsemane translates into oil press. Then he's telling them, guys, wake up. Wake up. Eden, paradise, oil press. This is the time we're supposed to be staying awake. You're the bridesmaids that I was telling you about earlier, and you're falling asleep on me right now. I need you guys to stay awake, because this is where this is where it's kicking off. And then if you're going to be my bride, or the representatives of telling how to, one of my favorite verses is in Luke 22:32. It says, I have prayed for you, Peter, that he desires to sift you like wheat, but when you are ready, strengthen the brethren. And I'm like, that's honestly like a life verse for me, is like once you're at your spot spiritually, do the best you can, but reach out and help somebody else up. That's why I hate when they're saying just toss a gospel tract and walk away. I'm like,
Yeah.
Christ literally went to people's houses and integrated himself. Like, that's discipleship. It's just, you know what? Okay, hand the tract, but also throw your number in there and say, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to call me. We can go to dinner, blah, blah, blah. I might sound crazy to you, but again, don't just toss something and then leave.
Well, I do believe that there's a hierarchy of discipleship, because I believe that you disciple people that are on a level that's close to your same level.
Yes.
And some
Yes.
people are out on the streets trying to bring people in from the streets, and some
Right.
people are about to be raptured, and they're discipling people who don't need to convert, who need to stop being lukewarm.
Yes.
To get them out of that space, because that's one of the most dangerous spaces you can live in. I just actually put out a word of prophecy of a dream that I was given on my channel. I go into all of this about, warning lukewarm Christians that you're in a danger zone. You need to get out of there. Do you know what your purpose is? Have you been called and chosen? Your calling and election made sure. Mormons talked about that a lot, and that's biblical. Have you received a promise that I have things written in my journal where it says Sharisa lives, and I don't even remember writing this, because I'm lucid when I write. I receive, and then I write, and then I get up and read it from another part of my brain, and I don't even remember writing it. And so that's the only reason I'm willing to come out and talk about these things, because I've been promised eternal life so many times from God. I don't have to worry anymore about being taken to a FEMA camp and leaving. It does say in the Bible that his saints, you'll be thrown into jail for 10 days. Some of you will. And if you suffer these things well, like all of these types of things that are in the Bible about the persecution of his people.
Right.
It depends. It's not like we're all going to get thrown into one FEMA camp at the same time, and then we're all going to get let out and all get raptured at the same time. Like, I already went to prison. They put me in a hospital and locked me up for 7 days. And I couldn't, like, in this hospital, the like the weaponry, the energy weaponry that they have. I mean, it's kind of similar to 5G, but they have a hospital that's, I couldn't even think to pray while I was there. I didn't even remember how to, like, I know that God was still talking to me because I fasted the whole time I was there, but I couldn't pray. I couldn't think to pray. It was really weird. I can't even explain what was done to me. I was shut off when I was locked up in the psych ward after they arrested me. And that all happened. Just before that, the cops that arrested me, I literally said to them, because they came and formed a triangle in front of me, and I could feel all their Freemasonry coming, seeping out of it. Like, the sodomy was just seeping out of them, And I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, I dismantle this brotherhood. I said that to all these cops down in front of me, 12 different police from 2 different police forces. They threw me in jail. I didn't have any charges. So those biblical things that it talks about, because in my name, they'll put you into prison. And I'm like, gosh, well, I was only there for 7 days. I sure hope I don't have to serve 3 more, and anyway, it's happening. The patterns are playing out in people's lives. I see it with the women that I help all the time who've had their children taken away. And that's why I talk about KadoshLife, because we're trying to get our lives set apart and ready and prepared for all of these things, because it's coming. And I think it's coming sooner than a lot of people want to believe, but I don't think it necessarily is all going to happen on the same day for everyone. And I think that he's going to be harvesting and gathering. And that he actually gave me a vision where he showed me this. It was actually really beautiful the way he showed me how it was these roses. And I was in my childhood bedroom, and it was God. I knew it was God. And because I've never had a dream in that house or that room. And when God appears in my visions, he just appears as a man. But he brought a box, and it was like a package that had been shipped. And I opened up the box, and I was taking stuff out of it. And the first thing I took out was a sage rose, and it was dried. And it was cracked. It was all cracked. When sometimes roses dry, they get all malformed. And so then I set it on the bed, and I went to get back in the box. But every time I would go back to look at the roses, there would be 1 more there, and then 2 more there, and then 4 more there. And it kept doubling and tripling and adding to. And some of them were crackled, and some of them were really smooth and held their form really well. Well, when I went in to do my interpretation, what the color sage and roses and bringing it all together, and every time I would look down at the roses and it would multiply. I would look up at this man in my dream who is a symbol of God, and he would just have this huge smile on his face. Like he was so glad to just give me another rose and give me another rose and another rose. But the symbolism is all eternal life and immortality. And that change that's going to come. So I believe it starts with a small group of people, and he adds to it as people are ready. And I believe that it's going to be so miraculous. We can't even explain it or understand it. He says in the Bible that, there's things that he has prepared for us that he hasn't even prophesied, that we're not even going to understand. And, time's not going to exist anymore. It's not going to make any sense. I believe we're going to live interdimensionally, immortally. And he's going to gather his army of 144,000, and I believe that they'll be the first who will come back in the cloud of glory with God. And then from there, it's just going to go out to all of the whole body of Christ. So that's kind of my current belief and understanding of how that all plays out.
Well, 144,000 is supposed to be like a number of affinity. So it doesn't necessarily mean specifically just that, but everybody through the past years and whatnot. But like you were just saying, though, like this was about 3 or 4 months ago. I have a prayer warrior that's like, she's blessed with visions all the time, but she said, are you okay? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, why are you asking me that? She said, well, I was hit with a vision last night. You were like in my kitchen, and you were sitting in front of a laptop, and I didn't know what you were doing, but like, it was just you. Like everything else was just spaced out. There wasn't anything else there, but you were staring very intently with whatever you were doing. And I just prayed that you'd have clarity and whatever. And I was like, what time was this? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm asking all these questions, and come to find out, I was like, the night before I was doing a post, and I was like, I'm hoping that this will reach at least 1 person. And I was so tired because, again, I'm working a 3rd shift. I was just like, okay, I'm staying up early in this morning. I'm like, I'm so tired. I want to go to sleep. But I said a little prayer that, God, I hope this reaches somebody. And the fact that she sent me that, I started crying. I was like, he's listening. And the fact that we have that connection of somebody sending a vision. My other lady friend in Australia, she said she saw me in a vision walking through an alley, and there were people that were sitting in the trash and in the shadows and stuff like that. And as I walked by, it was starting to make them like reach up and like grab for me, because it was awakening something in them. They wanted that, or it was healing somebody as I walked by, like Peter's shadow. And I was over here like, that is so like, I admire you folks that have those visions, because it's so encouraging, and it sends a chill down your spine. You're just like, okay, I'm doing something right here, and it's something that's heavenly sent. And I don't, just to be known that you're a vessel for that is just so encouraging. I mean, she had another vision. I went to church and I saw my buddy Jack, and he might be Nephilim. I don't know. He's 6 foot something, super tall kid, and I looked at him sitting in the back pew in the foyer area. And she said, I just had like a vision, like I think I'm in your church. And so she says she's seeing the light color blue and she's seeing the color white. And I'm like, well, he's wearing black and she's wearing like some other random shade. So we're talking the whole time during the sermon, because it was a lot more interesting talking with her with whatever the vision she was getting. And I said, there's a reason why you're saying, look at this, look at this, look at this. So I said, all right, I'll take a picture of them. So as I turned my camera, I took the picture, I sent it to her, and I looked at the picture and I was like, oh, wait a minute. The guy standing to the left of the couple that I took the picture of, Jack and the girl, he's wearing a light blue button-down shirt. And the lady standing to the right of them at the end of the service was wearing a white shawl. And I said, you can't tell me that's a coincidence that you were seeing those two colors, and it literally encapsulates the two individuals at which you had this vision of. Now, to tack into this in the beginning, I came, my birth mom came from the same hometown as my pastor, or the grandfather of the kid that I'm talking about. And the fact that I was born in Mass, and out of all the churches in Connecticut and all the world, I walked into the one with a family that's from the same hometown as my birth mom. Statistically, not possible. It's like there's a reason why I'm here. I've gone through so much hate and bumping heads with the pastors and stuff like that, but I've always had a really good connection with Jack. And the fact that she had that vision, I said, is there something connected with that? Is like, am I supposed to help him some point in the future, like mentor him? Because he's like the only one that still listens. He's there, but like I think there's still potential for him. And the fact that she had this vision, I was like, I'm loving it. It's something I've never tapped into. And when I came back in, I was taking pictures to show her what the building looked like. She's like, yes, I saw that. I saw this. And the pastor came in. He's like, can I help you? I'm like, I'm just helping some lady. She had a vision. I'm just trying to help give her some clarity of what some stuff she saw. And he's like, okay.
Well, and that makes sense because he's shown me, because, you know, I've been a healer for years, and I know I had a role to help other people and trying to figure out in what avenue and how to do it and what that's going to look like.
Right.
One thing that he showed me and told me really clearly recently was like, you're only going to be helping a couple or a few people at a time, because the thing is it's not like we can do these shows and put them out there and help masses at the same time.
Right.
Them. But when it comes to true discipleship, you're not just like saving a soul and leaving. Like, he's building a family.
Yes.
You know, and so this person is becoming a part of your family. And so it's not like you can just, that's why I don't even believe in therapy, which my other interview that I have on Friday is going to be with a SRA therapist who knows that even modern day therapy is satanic. So she's going to be really fun to talk to. But you know, really being able to help somebody takes love and involvement and interest in their personal life. And the way that I help people who are going through similar things that I've gone through and have similar backgrounds, in order for me to mentor or disciple them, I have to have a personal relationship with them. And so, like, I can't charge them, and I can't even make it formal. And so I've known for years God's been training me, even when I was an energy healer, the way that I never charged even when I was energy healing, because it took away the ability to make it really personal, and there to be love in between that takes place. And so, you know, a lot of times I was sent places to do things that I ended up messing up or doing, you know, sinning in when I was in new age stuff and going into shamanism. Like, looking back and beating myself up about it, it's like, I know I was there for a reason. The reason I was there is because I'm a gatherer. And I'm going to go back to a lot of these people that I met later and be able to bring them truths that they're still stuck and deceived in. And I had to develop really deep interpersonal relationships with a few of those people, you know? And so sometimes you might think you're going to church to receive anything. Like you said, you weren't really receiving anything from church, but you were developing an interpersonal connection with somebody in order to disciple, you know? And so he sends us out in different ways, and sometimes we're blinded by it. But I do think soon enough, when the change comes, that we'll be given really specific missions and like, I've seen some pretty miraculous things of me doing in my future, in an immortal state. And, you know, I do believe that he's going to give us those powers and abilities in order to be able to survive. We have to have something, because the evil, wicked power that's taken over through these rituals that they're doing and the things that they're able to, like, I share, I don't know if you've watched any of my stories, but I share some stories of black magic that I witnessed
Yes,
within the
that's what some
course
of the
and
people
stuff
saw.
like
Yeah.
that. And I was blown, my mind was blown, and I was mad, and I went to God and I was like, why, like, I've been seeking you for years, and my whole method that I wrote of, I call it energy healing, but it really was, I used the name of Jesus Christ, and I really tried to stay away from anything that wasn't biblical in it.
Right.
But it was based in spiritual gifts. Illumination of spiritual gifts was what that healing method was based on. And so I have a deep knowledge and understanding and study of spiritual gifts. And when I saw the spiritual gifts that the kingdom of darkness had, I was like, we're lagging. God's people are lagging in our spiritual gifts and abilities. And it pissed me off. And so I intercede and go before the throne of God often and pray and ask him to up the gifts of the body of Christ and our powers and abilities, because, and there's even wicked people within the church, like, oh gosh, what is that guy's name? There's a guy that wrote a whole book that I ended up on this page one day. I didn't know how I stumbled upon him. And he also, John MacArthur. It's not him, but it's somebody who works in
Affiliated.
yeah, and there's this whole tribe of people out there who teach essentially that the Bible's dead and that we don't have gifts anymore and that heaven's closed, and what they're really doing is incapacitating the body of Christ from being
Right.
able to have
Discredited.
power and authority against the enemy.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that's intentional. I think that a lot of those men are Freemasons, and their job is to go out and to disarm the body of Christ.
Same thing with Billy Graham.
Yeah. Yeah, but we're going to have, major power to stand up against what's coming as soon as they decide to come out. Because that's the thing, is that the police are trained in it,
Yep.
the military's trained in it, and it's not just going to be a physical war. It's going to be a mind war, because they're working with giants and Nephilim, men that stare at goats, like that movie. They're trained psychically. Like, it's going to be a spiritual battle, and if you don't have the gift of the Holy Spirit intact and all of that, it's going to be a mess. So this is another thing I want to talk to you before we kind of wrap up here, is about, and I would love to do a part 2 if you can, because we didn't really get to go into how this is showing up.
I like talking with you. You're fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I'm not sure if you saw. Yeah, you did. You did see the thing with Nick, but with Nick, like, I'm loving reaching out in that field, because it's at least somebody that's on the fence and they're willing to listen, as opposed to just throwing it off. I said, even if I can reach some people that are just like, and I have. One guy said he didn't believe anything in the Bible, but the posts that I've been doing was having him pick up a Bible and actually was curious, because I was answering questions that he's always been cynical on. I said, that's the ones I'm trying to reach. I really don't care about Nick, his background with drugs, and I'm reaching people that are at least browsing around. They're looking. So sorry. Anyways, continue.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I'll link that below as well. But, well, we can go on later and talk about how it shows up in Hollywood, and how it's affecting everybody, and what this cult looks like out in the modern world on part 2. And it's really good that we laid this biblical historical foundation of where this Nimrod cult comes from, and relating it to end times, and how that's all going to play out. But I would really love to I don't know, I forgot what I was just going to ask you about end times. I just lost my train of thought. I don't know. Oh, about how we're discipling others. So how do you, what I really want to ask before we go into how it looks out in the world.
Right.
Is, why is it important, with your posts, a lot of your posts are about politics and people we see in Hollywood on the movies and things like that.
Yep.
So before we do a part 2 next time and talk about that, why is it important that people understand that that's what's happening behind the scenes in the world? Like, why is it important to reach people?
That's so glad you asked that, because, and again, I guess I've mentioned this to my buddy Evan and a couple of others who were former mentors, and especially one mentor, Carl, and he was the one that told me about the whole wedding ceremony, and I thought that was one of the most beautiful analogies ever. And as you just said, there's levels of discipleship, and I think the whole thing with pastor is wrong. There was like 6 other elders, this thing, that, and then you look up the history of the church. It's like, it's not just It's not designated by man-made structure. It's literally just there's gifts in the body of Christ, and we're all supposed to encourage and cultivate that. Is there the beautiful faith that's just, I have enough to believe in Jesus and that's it? They don't need to know the levels that you and I know. Absolutely. I'm not absolving that at all. I think those people are great, and I appreciate their innocence because I genuinely know they love Jesus. That's it. And that's what
Wait, before you go on, I forgot to say, those were the roses that I saw that were
Yeah.
not cracked. Those were the roses that I saw in my vision. They weren't cracked. That's why there was two different kinds of roses. Those people, the pure ones, who just really strong Christians, don't really know much about the world of wickedness, just really innocent and pure, and haven't, been abused and weren't taken into a cult. That's what he was showing, these two different parts and pieces, like those who've been tried to be killed and raped since they were born. Born into the serpent seed. Those were the ones who were all cracked. And then there was the other ones that were preserved, that were pure, and that he was going to bring those together, to build his church up.
The outcasts, the broken ones, somebody that's gone through your stuff, my stuff. Somebody once told me that's like an incredible story. And I'm like, yeah, because I honestly see that as like, I have gone through so much on my own. Like, I didn't have somebody to help me process all of this until I finally was like, you know what? I can't work. I need to focus. I need to process, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? And when I'm looking at people obsessed with politics, when I'm seeing people get so gullible in the church, especially, and getting the thing in their arm, and when you start showing them a little clip just to test the water, they don't want to see it. When I tried showing Carl the symbolism on the Star of David flag, he's like, I know, I don't want to see it. I said, why? I'm just trying to give you some visual references. Well, I'll read it later. Well, you're not even asking what verse it is, so how do I know you're going to read it? Like, just stuff like that. And I'm trying to just dig a little bit. This is the garden. I'm just trying to dig a little bit and sift some of that soil so I can put a new plant in that spot. And they don't want to know that. And that's where you just tapped into. It's incredibly dangerous. And they're like, well, it doesn't really matter because I get out before it gets really bad. I'm like, listen, we are called to be spiritual warriors. So if you're saying it doesn't matter to you, the thing you put on your screen, you're watching it. Your screen is now a shrine. The guy you go into a booth to vote for is allegedly dictating the things of your country. That's part of your everyday life. The symbolism of every logo, from AT&T to AAA, it connects to Nimrod or some kind of occultic symbolism. And when somebody is pointing this out to you and you're refusing to see it, I don't know, like, should we just get rid of Ephesians 5:11? Have no works or deeds with fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them? We're not supposed to involve, but we can still at least study the outline. Somebody like yourself, you were ingrained with it, but now you're exposing it from the outside. Me, I've studied it enough, and I'm related to a guy that was a very prominent figure in writing the book. I love doing what I'm doing because I feel like it's a middle finger to him saying, dude, you let all these other people go astray. I'm now trying to bring them back. And I have the same bloodline, buddy. I can do that because I have the power of Christ that is within me to reverse that. And I have a gift of writing just like you did, buddy. I mean, there is that genetic core. And I think that's something that we as Christians, and I came up with this with my buddy when we were talking over a meal. And he's, again, a man of a simple faith. He doesn't understand all the greater things, but he listens to me at least. He at least is talking with me. And I said, this is what it is, two or more gathered. At least I can learn from you being an older man, and you can learn from me just hearing me talk. But I said, it's become cubicle Christianity. We put people into little boxes, just like our everyday society. And that's why I can't do production. It's just sit there and you become one with the machine. It's the online thing. I enjoy talking about it, but it's sad that all my friends are digital and online. I would love to just go to my church and start talking about what I know, and not in an arrogance, just this is what the spirits were given to me, like we're having right now. I'm hearing you talk, you're hearing me, like we're exchanging, we're growing, we're evolving, and that's organic. That's cross-pollinating. That is what this is all about. And when people who see our posts and just keep scrolling and ignoring, it breaks my heart because I'm like, you say you're a Christian, but you're not willing to tap into the spiritual upgrade level. You've been a Christian, let's say, for 20 years. Now you have a brother or sister that's revealing something and we just call them a nut. Or my pastor, when I'm taking the pictures for the lady, he's thinking, oh, there's no thing. You're probably talking to some psychic lady, and there's probably a nut. You be careful with somebody like that. It's like, no, that's how the spirit works. If you read the Bible, that's what a lot of the prophets were. They had visions from God. And now we're like the modern Pharisees. Like back in Jesus's day, it was known as religious sects. Today, we call them denominations. One was led by Pharisees. Today, they're led by pastors. And I just see that parallel. And when people ask me, why do you still go to church? I said, well, I'm there to just show myself. So when things hit the fan, somebody's going to remember something I said. I said, I'm not there for attention. I'm not there to be a cog in the wheel. At the moment, I probably am. I don't really care, because there's a reason I was brought to that particular thing. And I would actually like to ask you this, is that I've been telling people it's not necessarily a vision, but it's like a conviction, where I think my pastor, his wife, is going to die very suddenly, shall we say. And I don't know how, but I have a feeling it's going to be incredibly fast. And considering I know he loves her immensely, it's going to hit him hard. And something's telling me that I'm going to be the aftermath involved. I don't know how, but everything in my heart is telling me it's going to happen. But him and I, we've knocked heads so many times in the past. And I've told people, I said, technically, there's things I've told you, you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, well, why would you still care? I'm like, I love him. He's lost, but like, again, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He has a good heart, but he's so misguided by man's teachings. So anyways, if I could wrap it back to you, and maybe we can close it here, but
what were you asking me about your that feeling that you had, or what I think
it's like a gut conviction that something's going to happen with her, and like it really traumatizes me in the sense, because I can sense it. I don't have the gift of visions, but I can sense that something traumatic is going to happen, and that I'm going to be the person to intercede or to give a message and something like that. And I don't know, like, what would you say that taps into?
Well, first of all, just about why you're still going to church, which is interesting. It's like I tried to still go for a little while too, and teetered here and there. And the last church I went to, they were doing witchcraft on me. And I was recruited there again by another witch at my work, and it was this whole setup, and I just washed my hands of it finally. And so people giving you like, well, why are you still going to church and all of that? Well, because not all of us are called to go to church to receive. Some of us are called to go to church to support or to give. Like you think that because what Jesus said, he was the least of these, but he served the greatest. And so sometimes the greatest is in the lowest position, just looking like some guy sitting in the
foyer.
So God has you there for a reason. And if that's what you're feeling, everybody has spiritual gifts, all work very differently. And I'm also a very deep feeler. And before I was given the gift of vision and sight, like I was telling you that day, I sat down with my journal. I'd been praying and I felt like I knew I had it. And the reason I wasn't in tune with it was because my family was doing magic on me to keep me sleeping. So, the enemy usurps a lot of our spiritual gifts. If there's certain things on the bloodline, and having Albert Pike as a distant relative, I don't know if you've done deliverance on that or done a renunciation of that on your bloodline. If you do, maybe your spiritual gifts will open up, because the enemy has legal right to some of our spiritual gifts through our bloodline. And what you're talking about earlier, what you're doing with the writing and relating that to Pike being on your bloodline, that's cleansing your bloodline of iniquity. Through changing. I feel like a lot of us are called to do a work in this area because of what our bloodlines did. We have to undo it and serve the community, serve the body through turning that for good and reversing it and exposing it. And so you're cleansing your bloodline of iniquity. And, if you go and do an actual, I don't know how far back he goes, 3 or 4 generations.
3 or 4.
Because biblically speaking, that iniquity can still be passed down to us. And so that can be giving the enemy legal right to hold some of your spiritual gifts captive. So, if you do some renunciation prayers or some deliverance or some, going before the throne of God and claim on some of your gifts or abilities, that may heighten those gifts and abilities. But that being said, before I went through all of that process and was working with just my gifts of feeling and Holy Spirit was all that I was working with. God told me to see is to be blind. He
Mm.
withholds some of those gifts sometimes on purpose, because sometimes the visual is a distraction, which is why out here which is why the all-seeing eye and the physical, it's
Yes.
so disorienting, because discernment becomes really hard when you're not going into the feeling of it. That's why Holy Spirit is a still small voice, because you
Yes.
really have to feel into, is that what you think it is? Is that what you feel that it is? You know, and so so that feeling that you're getting, it can be a stronger knowing than even if you would have had a vision or a dream about it,
Right. Right.
because it's palpable, right? Like the feeling without sight or vision. Our five senses are the most temporal, worldly gifts that we have. The spiritual gifts that we have are the strongest and give us the most information.
Mm-hmm.
The little tiny feelings that we get, and intuitions and Holy Spirit whispers, those
Yeah.
are some of the most powerful knowings, because they come through such a tender, gentle source, that we know that, like, that was no mistake, you know? So, so anyway, just long story short, yes, I do believe, and I know that that's possible because I have similar knowings about people in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and similar promises about how I will play a role in certain people's lives when certain people go. And I know
Right.
the generation of our parents before us, that age and generation, um, I've known for years that there's going to be a massive wipeout of that entire generation. A ton of those are just going to go all at the same time. And part of it is because they cannot receive the truth. They're
Mm.
so brainwashed. They cannot receive. They don't have enough faith to receive Christ. They don't have the wherewithal to understand what's going to play out in the world, and it's almost just like a gift, because they're what's holding back a lot of the earth. And when we see a lot of that generation go, that's going to be another sign of, you know, the times that we're in.
Right.
But also, as part of what I was explaining to you earlier about the sifting of the wheat and the tares, and the wedding feast, and the harvest and the rapture, as a part of that, as part of those raptures playing out, another part of that season is going to be deaths, and not necessarily in um, the destruction period, but many deaths playing out as warnings because of sin, because of lifestyle. And I don't know exactly in what way, but I've been shown multiple times that a lot of the heads of these brotherhoods are going to be taken out through different ways of death, so that other people in their bloodline or just under them will have a chance to come to Christ and cleanse their bloodline of those iniquities as well.
Mm.
Um, and so we are going to experience a lot of death, and we are put in people's lives for a reason, to help them through that, and to, you know, if they have a calling and a role and they need to be brought through something, then it's very likely that you're, you know, put there for a reason. So
Well, two
that's like,
individuals, Jack and him. So I feel like there's going to be. Again, I just said to her, because she was saying that the girlfriend, that she looked like she was getting mad at me and ended up I don't know, like giving me a dirty look, and he was kind of like looking between her and I, like what's going on here, like what should I do? It says it could be in the future that she's going to be a little bit of an obstacle for him, that he needs to listen to me, because he said like I looked annoyed that whatever she was saying to him was pulling him away from whatever he could potentially do or become. And I go, again, it took a couple weeks to sift that out. But what you were just saying, I was trying to explain that to a guy, is that vision sometimes is like you're not supposed to see it all at once, and that's why he healed that one particular guy with mud and spit. What do you see? I see men like trees walking. Okay, and we're gonna try it again. It's supposed to be gradual. Sometimes I'm gonna walk you through it. You know I'm gonna do it, but you need to be just prepared of the process. You know, you still see something, but I'm the one guiding you to what you're supposed to be seeing. And when I've looked at it that way, I'm like, it gave me a comfort in my heart, is I may not see exactly to be blind, but I know ultimately that's what faith is the greater faith is, you know, seeing things you're not seeing, or to paraphrase. That's honestly where I'm at this point. But like,
Well, and part of the reason for that is because we're supposed to keep seeking him. And if he just gave us everything all at once, I have what I needed, thanks, and you're on your
Right.
way. But
Then
that's
you
why
run
he
out.
prophesies in part, because that's how a lot of my dreams and visions work. He'll give me a big, huge dream or vision or a small one, and it's totally confusing. I'm not sure what it means. And, I was explaining this to my daughter the other day because um, we're always in a conversation with God. Everything that we're
Mhm.
doing is involved in an ongoing, never ending conversation with God. And so when I have a dream or a vision and I don't know what part of it means, now he's asking me, okay, ask me a question. And then I'll write in my notebook a question like, well, what does this mean, Father? Show me more. Help me
Mhm.
understand this part of it. And, I have my visions and dreams are all over the place as far as like time. They don't follow a timeline. Some of them that
Right.
I've had years ago will be for a certain season. Some of them that I have today are for today. Some of them that I've
Right.
had a few weeks, and sometimes, something I'll have no idea what it was. And then all of a sudden something plays out and I'm like, oh, that's what that was about. And then there's another piece of it that's for another time. And so it's just really all about that relationship and seeking and staying involved and engaged in the relationship because the conversation's never over. He's our
Right.
father. It's like, okay, now teach me this part. Now reveal to me this piece. And it's kind of like putting together a puzzle. And
Yes.
so anyway, well, it's super good to talk to you today, Brandon. I appreciate you showing up and all of your wisdom. And let's schedule a part 2 at some point when we're done, and we'll get more exciting information out there to those who love to watch the horror show. Just kind of to wrap up, my take on that is when you
Yeah.
ask why is it hard for people to know this stuff, like you said it's dangerous, right? Well,
Yes.
I
So
think it's
dangerous.
important to clarify that if you come into, there's a lot of truthers out there. Most of the truthers that I see are not Christians and aren't
Yes.
talking about the other piece and part of it. And that's where
Yes.
you come into danger. Because even though I carried Jesus Christ in my heart when I went through my seasons of unveiling with all of this stuff, that's how I up, ended up getting arrested and put away. And, because there was a legal right.
Right.
Satan had a legal right to me because of sin. And there's unintentional sin, and God has always led me into unintentional sin very blind. I don't intentionally sin. And I
Right.
have considered myself a Christian my whole life, even when I was going into shamanism, and that I knew that the church wasn't where it was at. So I was trying other places to help people heal. But, you know, either way, it's important for people to recognize that we see both sides. Some people are very consumed with this stuff and they treat it like it's just a horror movie. Like
Right.
people are engaged and obsessed with it because it's thrilling and exciting and crazy for them to go, oh my gosh, I can't believe these people do all this crazy stuff and what they're into and what their secrets that they carry. And they're like
Oh
addicted
yeah.
to the show.
Well, that's
And
what I get on some posts. I'm like, guys, when I talk about Christ, you guys ignore it like crazy. When it's a cult, like it burdens my heart. It's like that's the only reason you're sensationalized with some of my posts. I'm showing you this, and the inscription beneath is to point you to why this is not good and where it originates from. It grieves
and
my
you know,
heart. Sorry, but yeah.
and you know how God showed that to me when I first started my Instagram a few months ago was like he gave me this vision of trying to go fish for a serpent. It was like this well, and there was a serpent down in the well, and I
Yeah.
was trying to get the serpent out of the well that was stuck. And I was fishing with this little pole, and what I was trying to catch the other serpent was a serpent. And I came to him, was right, and he's like, you can't catch a serpent with a serpent. And what he was trying to show me was that fishers of men, if we're going to go out and fish,
Right.
you have to bring the light, and you have to provide a solution, and you have to provide the resolve, which is
Mm-hmm.
why I do courts of heaven stuff and deliverance from all of that. Because the thing is nobody's unaffected by this because the beast system runs everything. And it doesn't
Yes.
matter if you're born into a bloodline or not, you're born under generational curses on the land of America or any other country that you live in, because the God of this world is Satan. And
Mm-hmm.
so in order to, get out from under all of that, we have to be fighting the battle. And if you're not fighting the battle, then you're losing,
Yes.
because it's happening either way. And so, yes, this information is important,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also dangerous. And so depending on where you're at in your walks, like we said, there's those roses that aren't going to be crinkly, you know, who are just
Right.
remain pure. And
Right.
it's not to say that like we should be shoving this stuff down anybody's throat, or that you have to come to this knowledge or know it, because some people just truly do love Christ, and that's
Right.
not their fault. Just like the body
Right.
of Christ, you know, eye is not supposed to be jealous of the hand, you know. If I carry a sword in my hand and I'm doing battle, you know, but my ear is only to hear. My ear is not supposed to be jealous of my hand because it's fighting the battle. You
Right.
know, maybe my ear, all it's supposed to do is listen and receive. And so there's different purposes in the body of Christ. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not like it's necessary for the whole world to know all this. I think I don't know how some people are going to make it through, but God's going to save who he's going to save. He's
Right.
foreordained who he's foreordained. And, you know, that's where I get in trouble and have to be careful, because I can't judge, you know, what people's role is in the kingdom. But, you know, what we go into next time will be a little more fun to talk about, because it's what people deal with in their entertainment and everything.
Yes.
But, you know, I try to stay away from all that stuff now, just because it's like opens portals, and it's a mess, and everything in our entertainment now is run by these cults. But in order to help people to really understand, you know, why that's important, you know, part 2 is probably going to be a good one to bring people. Some people are probably going to want to watch that and then come back to this, who maybe aren't so Christian or ready to hear this piece of it yet.
Right. Right.
But we'll go into, you know, who in Hollywood is in these Nimrod cults, and who in politics is in these Nimrod cults. Because the really fascinating piece to me is that, you know, we'll go deep into next time, is the transgenderism that happens in
Yes.
the Nimrod cults. And that's kind of fascinating. So anyway, well, we'll wrap it up. Anything else you
Okay.
want to say about this piece today, Brandon, before we
I absolutely learned a lot. I'm quite impressed with your knowledge and connections there. But yeah, I absolutely loved it.
me
That
too.
this is honestly what it's all about. I really wish that it's sad that it's gone to the podcast format where these kind of talks can occur, and it's not within the quote unquote the churches.
Yeah.
Because again, it does break my heart is that I have to bite my tongue because they're not ready. And that's what I keep telling people is I sometimes get it is why he had to use parables, because he's trying to dumb down something that's so high up and above our imaginations that unless you actually accept the spirit and you've been walking and seeking him for a period of time, you're not going to understand it. You're going to be brainwashed and susceptible to the distractions and the deception. So
Well, and
yeah.
we are the body, we are the church, and where 2 or 3 are
Yes.
gathered in my name, and
Yes.
that's where it's at. That's where the power and authority and dominion really is in the 2 or 3 that are gathered, because I'm not seeing it in the churches. And, you know,
Yes.
like I said, a lot of people who are still going to church, who are knowledgeable and awake, aren't, they may think they're there to receive, and they may find themselves frustrated, but, you know, I pray for them that God will come and reveal to them that they're to give, not necessarily to receive.
And honestly, I'll close with this one, but with Nicodemus, that's what I tell people, because I have a lot of followers and some of them are still Mormon and stuff like that. And I referred them to your page. I'm like, follow her. She'll explain it. I don't bother to study all the theology denomination. I don't
Oh,
care
yeah.
about that.
Mhm.
My core thing is like Christ. I said, I don't care about your denomination. I'm looking for the Nicodemus to come to me at night and still ask the questions, because you understand. Yes, I understand the law. I understand this, but I still have questions. And he went at night, and somebody actually was preaching something really good I heard on the radio. He says he went at night, but he was willing to bury Jesus's body during the bright daylight. Like that's how much of a transformation it was. He had to hide, and then he says, "You know what? I'm willing to actually go out in broad daylight and do this in front of my colleagues for everyone to see."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, because
Yeah.
he was part of quote unquote the thing, but he still was like, I have to ask him a question, because what's going on right now, there's something in my heart that's saying that's not right. So I don't care about your denomination. I'm seeking for your heart that's seeking God. At the end of the day, all the theology and stuff like that, those are weeds among the tare, you know, like at the end of the day, I'm here to try to help you and you to help me to try to just find Christ at the end of the day. That's what I care about.
Yeah, we got to rebuke that religious spirit and get out. So I keep telling people is like God's coming for his people to pull them out of the churches. And that's
Yes.
where you're going to find God's people is, you know, it's funny too, because they talk about in the end times, the big, well, what's the word? What's that word when everybody leaves the church?
falling away. Great falling away.
Yeah.
Deception.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because there's always the light and dark side of everything. There's going to be a big falling away from the churches, but
Mhm.
part of the falling away of the churches is going to be because the body of Christ is supposed to fall away from the churches.
Yes.
But that's the wicked are getting more wicked and the righteous are getting more righteous. And so we're definitely seeing that play out. And
Mm.
that's another reason it's important for this information all to get out there, because when you realize, like I did, how evil the world is around you, scary, and it makes you, almost like that baby who needs the binky to suck on, which is like Jesus. That's,
Yes.
God, our Father. We need that soothing and supplication
Comfort.
from Him, and to understand, it's going to bring a lot of people to understand the wickedness of the world. So,
Yeah.
all right, well, we'll get more into it next time. Thanks a lot, Brandon.
All right. Thank you. I look forward to your messages.
All right.
All right. Catch you on the next one. Bye.